I grew up about 30 miles outside Llano, in a place where you could drive half an hour without seeing another porch light. The air out there always felt a little older than it should, like it remembered things you didn't want to know. I never paid much attention to the old farmhouse on FM 1792 until the sheriff's office sealed it off after the incident. People called it the Jarrell place, though nobody named Jarrell had lived there for decades. The last owner was an old man named Clyde Deaver, a quiet, strange fellow who never came into town except for gas and cigarettes. When he died in 2012, the property sat empty, sagging into itself until the roof started caving and the wild sunflowers took over the porch. I was working for the county cleanup crew when we were assigned to clear the place. Normally, we dealt with simple things: hoarder houses, meth trailers, the usual Texas decay. But that house was different from the start. The air around it had a stillness that felt wrong. Even the cicadas were quiet. When we stepped out of the truck, I remember my boots sinking into soft red mud even though it hadn't rained in weeks. The smell that came off the building was strange too. Not rot exactly, but something sharp, like old paint and rust mixed with wet plaster. We pried open the front door, and a gust of heat rushed out as if the house had been holding its breath for years. Dust swirled in the sunlight like ash. Inside, everything was in collapse. The floor sagged in the middle, wallpaper hanging like dead skin, furniture tipped over as though someone had left in a hurry. The sheriff had said the property needed to be cleared for demolition, but he warned us not to mess with the back bedroom upstairs. "That room's a sealed scene," he said. "Leave it alone. Just bag up the rest." He didn't explain why, and none of us asked. Still, the curiosity got into me early. By the time we reached the staircase, I'd already decided I was going to look. The stairs groaned under every step. At the top was a narrow hallway lined with family photos, the kind that go yellow around the edges. The glass in the frames was cracked, but I could still make out the faces. Children mostly, all with the same vacant smile. The wallpaper up there was covered in little white handprints overlapping so thickly it looked like snow. I thought maybe kids had come in over the years to vandalize, but when I brushed my hand over one of the prints, the paint flaked away to reveal older ones underneath, like layers built up over decades. At the end of the hallway was the door we'd been told not to touch. It looked ordinary, painted the same dull green as the rest, but the edges were lined with rusted nails hammered straight through from the inside. Something had sealed itself in. That was what got me. Not someone locking a door to keep others out, but someone locking it from within. I told my partner Luis we should take a quick look before the sheriff came by for inspection. He shook his head and said he didn't want anything to do with it, so I waited until he went back down to get more trash bags. I slipped my crowbar under the latch and pried. The first few nails came out with a groan, like something exhaling. Dust rained from the doorframe. When I finally pushed it open, it swung slowly, catching on something heavy behind it. The smell hit first: stale, chemical, something like old milk and copper. The window was covered by a nailed-up board, but thin lines of daylight seeped through the cracks, striping the room in slanted gold. The wallpaper was covered in hundreds of tiny white handprints, the same as the hallway, except in here they were thicker, clumped together as though dozens of hands had pressed against the walls at once. There was no bed, no dresser, just a small wooden rocking horse sitting in the middle of the room. It moved slightly when the door opened, like it had been waiting for that breeze. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself the movement was just the draft. Then it rocked again, slow and deliberate. I took a step closer. The floorboards creaked under me, soft with age. A faint scratching sound came from beneath my boots. At first, I thought it was rats. But it wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a steady scrape, stop, as if something were trying to dig its way upward. I backed up fast, my throat tight, but the sound stopped as soon as I moved. The rocking horse stood still again, perfectly balanced. When Luis came back up, he saw the door open and cursed me out. I told him it was fine, that there was nothing inside worth worrying about, but even as I said it, I couldn't take my eyes off the floor. I felt that same wrong stillness return, the kind that presses against your eardrums. I told him I was going to grab a photo for documentation and then we'd nail it back up. He muttered something in Spanish and went to get a hammer. I lifted my phone and took a single picture. The flash reflected off the wallpaper, bright white for a split second. When I looked at the screen, something strange caught my eye. Behind the rocking horse, the wall looked darker, like a shadow, but not from the light. It had the faint outline of a person crouching, knees bent, hands spread against the wall. I turned the phone away, then back again. The shadow was gone. We resealed the door that afternoon. I didn't tell Luis what I'd seen, but I deleted the picture on the drive back. Still, that image stuck in my head, the small shape pressed against the wall, the curve of the spine, the faint white handprints reaching outward. A week later, the sheriff called to tell me not to go near the property again. He said they'd been forced to reopen the investigation after reports from a demolition crew. They'd found the door torn off its hinges and the wallpaper stripped away. The wood beneath was marked with carvings, rows of tally marks, thousands of them cut deep into the boards. In the middle of the wall was a message scratched so hard it splintered the wood. It read, "I'm still in here." I quit the cleanup job a month after that. But the thing is, I never forgot that smell or that sound under the floor. Last year, driving through Llano on my way to see family, I took a detour without really meaning to. I found myself back on FM 1792, parked across from the overgrown lot. The farmhouse was gone, flattened, but the foundation remained, a rectangle of cracked concrete surrounded by wild grass. I sat there with the windows down, listening. The air was still, too still. Then just faintly I heard it again. The scrape, stop, scrape, stop. It was coming from beneath the slab. I put the truck in reverse and left fast, but before I hit the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. In the dust cloud rising behind me, something shifted. The shadow of the house was still there, faint but standing upright. And in the middle of it, I saw the outline of that little rocking horse, moving slowly back and forth. I first heard about the old farmhouse outside of Lubbock from a man named Troy, who ran a salvage yard off Highway 84. He was one of those quiet types who only spoke when he had something worth saying. And when he told me there was a place out near Slide that ain't right, I knew it wasn't just another ghost story meant to pass the time over a beer. He said some kids had gone in there to film one of those urban exploration videos and came out white as flour, saying they'd found a radio in the living room that turned itself on every night at exactly 2 a.m. It wasn't plugged into anything, yet it played a voice, an old preacher's sermon, the kind of southern drawl you'd hear in a country chapel. According to Troy, the church that preacher belonged to had burned down more than 60 years ago. I don't usually buy into ghost stories, but I had my own reasons for being curious. My grandfather used to live near that area, and he'd talk sometimes about a revival church called St. Luke's Pentecostal. He said it went up in flames one night in 1961, killing most of the congregation. The preacher, a man named Father Caldwell, was said to have kept preaching even as the rafters came down, his voice echoing through the fields while the flames tore through the building. Some swore they could still hear him long after the fire was out. So a few weeks later, on a cool October evening, I decided to see that house for myself. The place sat a few miles off a dirt road, surrounded by dry cotton fields and mesquite trees that clawed at the wind. The sun had already dropped below the horizon, and the air had that electric stillness that always comes before a West Texas cold front. The farmhouse looked like it had been abandoned for decades, windows boarded, roof sagging, porch steps half rotted through. My flashlight beam caught on a rusted mailbox with no name left on it, just the faint outline of a number. 418. Inside, the smell hit first: dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. The living room was empty except for an old sofa with the stuffing coming out, and a wooden console radio sitting against the far wall. It was a big, heavy thing, the kind that might have once been the centerpiece of a family's home. Its wood was cracked, knobs rusted over, and the cord had been cut clean off near the base. Still, I felt that same strange pull that all the other explorers must have felt. I checked my phone. It was 1:54 a.m. The house was silent except for the wind brushing through the broken eaves. I sat on the floor across from the radio. The beam of my flashlight pointed at it. The seconds dragged by, slow and heavy, until my phone ticked over to 2. Nothing. Then faintly a hiss, like static from an old television. The radio crackled, the dials twitching slightly even though they shouldn't have been able to move. My heart started to pound as a voice faded in beneath the static, soft at first, then clear as a bell. "Brothers and sisters, the fire of the Lord burns bright tonight." The voice was calm, rhythmic, with that drawl that could only belong to an old Texas preacher. His words rolled through the empty room as if he were standing right there, sermonizing to the peeling wallpaper and broken glass. We must not fear the cleansing flame. It comes to purify, to reveal truth from the ashes. Let the fire in your hearts rise higher than the one outside these walls. It was Father Caldwell's voice. I didn't need anyone to tell me. My grandfather used to have recordings of his sermons on reel-to-reel tapes. He'd play them on Sundays sometimes, saying that preacher could make a believer out of the devil himself. The voice from the radio was the same, commanding, fevered, rising and falling in that hypnotic rhythm. Then the sound changed. Behind the voice, I began to hear other noises. Crackling wood, screams, a woman crying for help. The preacher kept speaking, his tone unwavering even as chaos unfolded around him. The Lord's fire does not destroy the faithful, it delivers them. Those who stand within it shall be reborn. My flashlight flickered. The air in the room grew hotter, thick with the smell of smoke, though there was nothing burning. The wallpaper started to curl slightly at the edges, and I could swear I saw a faint orange glow bleeding from the seams of the walls. I wanted to move, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I was rooted in place, watching that dead radio tremble on its stand as the voice rose to a near shout. Do not leave. Stay in the house of the Lord and be saved. The screams grew louder, joined by what sounded like collapsing beams. I caught a reflection in the radio's glass dial, shadows moving behind me. A dozen or more shapes, their faces indistinct but glowing faintly red, standing where the walls met the dark. They looked like silhouettes trapped in mid-motion, frozen in panic. I blinked and they were gone. When the radio finally went silent, the heat lifted. I gasped for air like I'd been underwater. My flashlight was steady again, the smell of smoke fading into the dust and mold. I took a step toward the radio, half expecting it to spring back to life, but it stayed quiet. I left the house that night, drove back to Lubbock, and didn't sleep a single hour. The next morning I called Troy. He picked up after a few rings, and before I could say a word, he told me something that made my stomach twist. You went there, didn't you? He said. You shouldn't have. That thing don't just play sermons. It plays what you bring into it. I asked him what the hell that meant, and he told me he'd been there once 2 years ago when he was young. He said he'd gone in with his brother and 2 friends, and the radio had played something different for each of them. His brother heard their dead father's voice. One of the friends heard his wife, who died in a car wreck. The other heard his own voice screaming for help. Troy said the next morning the radio was gone. They'd gone back a week later and it had reappeared, sitting right where it always had been. I didn't go back, but sometimes when I can't sleep, I turn on the old AM dial in my truck and flip through the static. A few nights ago I caught a faint voice. It wasn't a station, and it didn't have any signal, just that same rhythmic cadence. Brothers and sisters, the fire of the Lord burns bright tonight. I shut it off right away. But as I sat there in the dark, I realized something that froze my blood. The last words I'd heard from the radio that night in the farmhouse weren't part of any sermon. They were directed straight at me. We are not gone, the voice had said softly. We are just waiting for someone to listen. And every night since, at exactly 2 a.m., my phone, always on silent, always face down, lights up by itself. The screen shows nothing but white noise, flickering like static from an old television. And faintly beneath that hiss, I can hear him preaching. Locals near Fredericksburg said it hadn't rained in months, but the old white farmhouse at the edge of Route 87 always smelled like a storm had just passed through. The place was a foreclosure, sitting lopsided on its foundation, windows clouded with years of grime, the porch half rotted. You'd drive by and swear you could feel humidity cling to your skin, a wetness in the air that didn't belong to the Texas drought. I remember the first time I caught that smell myself, clean and sharp like wet concrete and ozone, when I stopped my truck near the fence to take a call. It was July, 102 degrees, and the air around the house shimmered with heat. But through all that, the scent of rain was heavy and real. I thought maybe there was a leak in a septic tank or a busted water line. It felt wrong for the air to be that damp when the grass around it was brown and crackling. 2 months later, I was hired by a real estate company out of San Antonio to inspect the property. They said the previous buyer had backed out after a single visit, claiming the basement flooded every night even though the weather had been dry all summer. The listing agent laughed when she said it, but there was something in her tone that told me she hadn't gone down there herself. The key they gave me was old and bent. The paperwork listed the owner as deceased, a man named Calvin Horn who'd died 3 years earlier, leaving no family. Nobody wanted the place. The county had foreclosed and tried to auction it twice, no buyers. I guess they figured I'd check the foundation and write a report, slap on a few photos, and they'd try again in the fall. I parked by the mailbox at noon. Even with the sun blazing down, the air near the house felt cooler, almost damp. When I stepped onto the porch, I caught the smell again. Fresh rain, but stronger this time, almost metallic. Inside, the air was still and dense. The floors were warped, wallpaper peeling. Every room had that same faint sheen, like the moisture never really dried. The kitchen smelled of rust and earth. I could hear faint dripping somewhere, rhythmic and slow. It led me to the basement door. The handle was cold to the touch, colder than it should have been. I pulled it open and a rush of damp air came up the stairs, carrying that scent in waves. The single bulb hanging above the steps was dead, so I turned on my flashlight. The beam caught something glinting at the bottom, a thin sheet of water covering the concrete floor, maybe an inch deep. The walls were smooth cement, lined with shelves of old paint cans and broken tools. At the center of the basement was a shallow pool, clearer than glass, perfectly still, reflecting the ceiling fan upstairs that I knew wasn't spinning because the house had no power. I crouched near it, shining my light into the pool. The reflection was so sharp it looked like I could reach in and touch the fan blades. I dropped a small screw into the water to test the depth. It didn't make a ripple. It just vanished silently, like the surface swallowed it whole. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I leaned closer and the reflection started to move. The fan blades began to turn slowly, the same way they would if someone had just flipped a switch. I heard a faint hum, like electricity running through wires. I looked up, nothing. The ceiling fan above me was dead still, but in the water it kept spinning. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not mine, not above me either. They came from inside the basement, from somewhere behind the furnace. Slow, deliberate steps on wet concrete. I called out, thinking maybe a squatter had broken in. No answer. The steps stopped. I swung my flashlight toward the sound and the beam caught the far wall. It was wet, not from condensation, but as if water was seeping through the concrete itself, spreading in slow veins that pulsed outward. I backed up toward the stairs, keeping my light steady. Then from the pool, a single drop of water lifted. Not fell, lifted, and hung in the air before falling back into place. The sound it made was deeper than it should have been, like something had echoed it from below. I turned and climbed the stairs, not running, but moving fast enough that I didn't care if the door slammed behind me. The smell of rain followed me out to the porch, thicker now, heavy with static. When I got back to my truck, the windshield was wet, just mine. Not a cloud in the sky, not another drop anywhere around. The air around the property shimmered again, but this time it looked darker, like a storm trapped in sunlight. That night I couldn't stop thinking about that reflection. I pulled up the photos I'd taken. Most were fine until I got to the last one. The image showed the basement from the stairs, the pool at the center. But in the reflection there was no ceiling fan. Instead I saw a man standing over the pool, staring down. His clothes looked waterlogged, his skin gray, his posture bent like someone caught in the middle of drowning. Behind him, in the reflection, the basement was full of water, almost to the ceiling. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. The man's face wasn't visible, just a faint suggestion of eyes that were open too wide. I deleted the photo. I told myself it was a glitch, a trick of the light, anything to keep from admitting what it looked like. But 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of water dripping. I live in a small house on the outskirts of Careville, and the roof's solid. Still, the sound was clear, measured like someone squeezing water out of a cloth. I got up and followed it to the kitchen. There was a puddle on the floor, perfectly round, reflecting the ceiling light. I touched it. It was cold and clear. The smell hit me again, the same storm-sweet scent from that house. I cleaned it up, went back to bed, and it came back an hour later. Same spot, same puddle. The next morning I drove back to the property. The sun was blazing, no trace of rain anywhere. But as soon as I opened the door, the air hit me, thick, damp, metallic. The basement door was already open, though I know I'd left it shut. The steps were slick with condensation. I descended slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The pool was still there, but bigger now, maybe 5 or 6 feet across. The reflection showed the ceiling fan spinning faster. The water was breathing, if that makes sense, rising and falling like it had lungs. Then I saw the outline of a hand just beneath the surface, not floating, pressed upward. The fingers flexed once, twice, slow and deliberate, before sinking back into the stillness. I stumbled back, flashlight shaking. My boots splashed. First time it had ever made a sound in that water. The ripples spread, and in the reflection, the fan stopped spinning. The basement grew quiet again. I don't remember running out, but I remember hearing the sound of thunder behind me, even though the sky was a clear, perfect blue. I filed my report the next day. Said the basement had a drainage issue, possible underground spring, recommended sealing and filling. They sold the house 2 months later to a couple from Dallas. A week after moving in, the husband went missing. The wife told the sheriff she woke up to the sound of rain inside the house, went downstairs and found the basement door open. She saw her husband's reflection in the water standing next to her, but when she turned, he wasn't there. The sheriff said the entire basement was dry when they arrived. The wife's shoes, though, were soaked through with clear water that had no smell except for one thing, like rain after a storm that never happened. They condemned the place last spring. Every window boarded, every door locked. But people still drive by and swear they smell it. That clean, sharp scent of rain, heavy in the air long after the clouds are gone, waiting for someone to open that door again. They said the doll was found by a volunteer fireman clearing debris after a storm, just an ugly little thing wrapped in burlap, sitting beneath the half-collapsed porch of an old shotgun house out on Highway 71. The place had been abandoned since the Bastrop fires, one of those brittle, heat-charred skeletons left standing long after the land had healed. Most people who drove past never noticed it. The property was hidden behind mesquite and brush thick as barbed wire. But when the storm rolled through that spring and ripped the porch apart, it unearthed what had been waiting underneath for years. A handmade doll, crudely sewn, its grin filled with real human teeth. The news barely made it past the local paper, a 2-paragraph oddity buried between obituaries and a high school sports update. But it caught my attention. I write about strange things for a living, local legends, unsolved crimes, folklore buried under decades of dust. So when I saw that line, dental records indicate teeth from 3 individuals, I knew I'd drive down there. Bastrop County isn't the kind of place that feels haunted at first glance. It's all pine and prairie, quiet roads that stretch into shimmering heat. But there's something in the stillness, like the land is holding its breath. I met the volunteer who found the doll at a diner just outside town. His name was Roy. He was the kind of man who wore his years in his hands, broad, dry, sun-cracked. When I asked about the doll, he didn't want to talk at first. He just stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the table. "It wasn't right," he said finally. "You ever see something that makes your body go cold before your brain figures out why?" He told me he'd been moving fallen boards when he noticed something under the porch. He thought it was a raccoon or a dead pet at first. Then he saw the grin. The teeth weren't set neatly. They were uneven, jagged, some still stained near the roots. Human teeth, unmistakably. The doll's face was made of faded cloth, its hair of black twine, its body packed with dirt and straw. Roy called the sheriff, who bagged it and sent it to Austin for analysis. A week later, they confirmed what he already knew. The teeth were real and from 3 different people, all adults, none of them traceable to any missing persons case in the county. I asked what happened to the doll after that. Roy said he didn't know. Some folks from the university came down. They said it was old, maybe 50 years or more. But that's bull. The stitching was clean, not weathered like you'd expect, like somebody made it not too long ago. I drove out to the property that afternoon. The house sat at the end of a dirt road lined with skeletal pines. The air smelled faintly of ash even years after the fires. The porch had caved in completely, the boards scattered like ribs. I stepped carefully, trying not to sink into the soft soil. The space beneath the porch was shallow, but I could still see a depression in the dirt where something small had once rested. And scattered around that hollow were things that made my stomach turn. Bits of fabric, a broken button, something that looked disturbingly like a molar half buried in the mud. When I turned to leave, I noticed a small burned-out barn near the tree line. Its roof had collapsed and vines crawled up the walls like veins. I don't know why I went inside. Maybe it was the curiosity that always got me into trouble. The air inside was thick and damp. Tools hung rusted on the walls, their handles eaten away. In the corner stood a workbench littered with nails, wire, and an old mason jar filled with what I thought were stones. But when I picked it up, I realized they were teeth. Dozens of them. Some small like children's teeth, others large and yellowed with age. The jar was sealed tight with wax. I took a photo and stepped back outside, shaken. The evening light had gone strange and dim. The trees around the property leaned inward, the air heavy and unmoving. I don't scare easy, but that place felt wrong. Not haunted, just occupied, like something had been there a long time and didn't like being disturbed. That night, back in my motel, I started digging. County records showed the property once belonged to a woman named Myra Dodd. She'd lived there until 1972 when she disappeared. No family, no next of kin, no forwarding address, just gone. The sheriff's notes from that year mentioned strange reports, livestock mutilations, missing pets, and something about children complaining of a smiling woman who left little gifts near their windows. The last note said only, "Search concluded." No body found. I couldn't sleep. The photo of the jar kept pulling me back. The way those teeth glinted in the dim barn light looked too deliberate, too careful. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office and found the old investigator's notes from Myra's case. One page caught my attention. It described a small effigy discovered behind the house, stitched from cloth containing soil, straw, and human remains, believed to be dental. The officer at the time assumed it was part of some folk ritual and ordered it destroyed. But apparently it hadn't been. That night I drove back to the property against my better judgment. The sun had already gone down and the road was empty except for the sound of cicadas screaming in the dark. I parked near the gate and walked in with my flashlight. The air was thicker than before, like the humidity itself had weight. The barn door creaked open without me touching it. Inside, the jar was gone. I turned in a slow circle, the beam of my light cutting through the shadows. There were small prints in the dirt, bare feet, too small for an adult, too deep for a child. I followed them around the side of the barn toward the porch, where they stopped at that hollow in the dirt. Something new sat there, the doll, but it wasn't the same one from the photo. This one was cleaner, its cloth unstained, the stitching fresh, and its grin was wider. I saw with sick certainty that it now had more teeth. The light flickered. The air pressed down on me like a hand. Somewhere behind me, something shuffled. I turned, but there was only the wind. When I looked back, the doll was gone. I don't remember driving back to town. I just remember waking in my motel room. The window open, the smell of pine smoke thick in the air. On the desk beside me lay something small wrapped in burlap. My hands shook as I unwrapped it. Inside was a single human tooth, smooth, white, perfect. I left Bastrop County that morning and never went back. I sold my car a month later because no matter how many times I vacuumed, I kept finding more teeth in the floor mats, in the glove compartment, even in the vent under the seat. The police thought I was crazy when I brought them a bag full of them. They said there was no way they came from my vehicle, that they weren't even recent. One of the officers said they looked like they'd been pulled decades ago. It's been 3 years. I still get letters from people who claim to have found something near that property. Small dolls, jars of teeth, things buried shallow in the dirt. Some say they see a woman near the ruins at night smiling under the trees. They call her the Tooth Mother. But no one's ever caught her, no one's ever proved she exists. Last month, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, just my name scrawled in shaky ink. Inside was a burlap doll with a crooked grin. I didn't open its mouth, but when I shook it, something rattled inside. I buried it in a dumpster behind my building, poured bleach on it, and left town for a week. When I came back, there was a small hole dug in the dirt beside my door. And lying at the bottom was the same doll, its grin wider than before, one new tooth glinting in the light. The house was built before the war, back when Nacogdoches was still a name whispered along wagon trails and not yet a proper town. Locals called it the Harper Place. No one had lived there since 1952, when the last of the Harpers were found dead, the father hanging from the second-floor landing, the mother in the parlor with her wrists opened, and their daughter, 12 years old, never found at all. The place sat about 6 miles east of town, down a red dirt road that curved like a spine through the pines, the house rising out of the woods like a rot-stained tooth. It wasn't big by plantation standards, but the front porch sagged under its own age, and vines had swallowed the columns. For decades, the county kept it sealed off with rusted wire and a wooden sign that read, Condemned by order of Nacogdoches County. Though anyone from the area knew it wasn't because of the structure, it was the mirror in the hallway. I first heard about it when I was 19, during my second year at Stephen F. Austin State. My roommate Mark was from a nearby town called Garrison, and one night after too many beers he told me about the Harper mirror. Supposedly it stood in a narrow upstairs corridor near the master bedroom, a gilt-framed thing taller than a man, with floral carvings that had long gone dull under the dust. The story went that anyone who looked into it saw a woman standing just behind them, always dressed in white, her face blurred, like something moving just out of focus. Each time they looked again, she'd be closer. By the fourth look, she'd be touching their shoulder. Nobody who saw her more than that was ever right afterward. They either disappeared or lost their mind. I thought it was just another local ghost story, the kind kids tell to spook each other, but Mark swore it was true. His uncle, a sheriff's deputy in the 70s, once went out there on a dare. He stopped sleeping after that, killed himself 2 years later. Mark never found out why. It was Halloween when we finally went. There were 4 of us, me, Mark, his girlfriend Denise, and her brother Tyler. The road was half washed out from rain and the woods pressed close, our headlights catching only glimpses of the old fence and the shape of the porch through the trees. When we stopped, the silence hit like a wall. You couldn't hear a single cricket or frog, just the creak of the car cooling off. The house looked almost black against the sky, the windows hollow. I remember thinking it felt wrong that something built by human hands could look that ancient. We got out, flashlights cutting through the damp air, and climbed the porch. The boards groaned under us, and the door, though swollen shut by years of humidity, gave way when Mark shoved it with his shoulder. The smell came first. Old wood, wet plaster, and something faintly sweet beneath it like decaying flowers. Inside, the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the floors slick with grime. Every step echoed. We explored a while, our lights sweeping over rooms filled with broken furniture and water-stained ceilings. The air was heavy and still, thick with dust that hung like mist when disturbed. Mark led us up the staircase, which leaned slightly to the left, the banister wobbling under his hand. The hallway at the top stretched long and narrow, lined with doors that had all been opened or smashed in. At the far end, facing us, stood the mirror. It was taller than I expected, maybe 8 feet, framed in gold leaf so tarnished it looked black in places. A crack ran across the top corner, branching like lightning. It reflected our flashlight beams back in fractured glints, and for a moment, I could almost believe there was movement inside it, something stirring behind the glass. Denise shivered and said she didn't want to go closer, but Mark laughed and told her to relax. He stepped up until he was right in front of it and aimed his light directly at his reflection. Nothing happened. He grinned at us over his shoulder, but his smile faltered as he turned back. "Wait," he said quietly. "Did one of you move?" We hadn't. He stared harder, then stepped back, shaking his head. "I thought I saw something," he muttered. Tyler, trying to prove himself, snatched the flashlight and stood before the mirror. His reflection looked pale, stretched, the beam of light catching the dust like smoke. "Hey," he said. He stopped mid-sentence. "What the hell?" he whispered. I came up beside him, and for a second I swear I saw it too. A faint white shape standing just behind us in the reflection, like a woman's outline blurred by fog. When I turned around, there was nothing there. Just the dark hallway and the beam of our lights cutting through it. Denise backed up toward the stairs. "I don't like this," she said. "Let's go." But Tyler didn't move. He just kept staring into the mirror, eyes wide, jaw slack. Mark reached out to grab his shoulder, and the instant he did, Tyler screamed. The sound tore through the house, sharp and guttural, and he fell backward, the flashlight spinning across the floor. I grabbed it before it rolled away, and when the beam hit the mirror again, the reflection was empty. No woman, no Tyler, just the 3 of us. But when I turned the light to the real hallway, he was gone. The floorboards where he'd stood were dusty and untouched. Denise ran to the spot, yelling his name, but there wasn't even a footprint left. Just silence and that faint sweetness in the air. Stronger now. Mark started cursing, shaking his head like he could knock sense back into himself. "He's hiding," he said. "He's screwing with us." We searched every room, calling for him until our throats hurt, but there was nowhere for him to go. Every window was nailed shut, every door swollen and locked. By the time we got back to the hallway, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The mirror was clean. The layer of grime that had dulled its surface was gone. the gold frame glimmering faintly under the flashlight beam. Mark stepped closer again, whispering Tyler's name like he thought the glass might answer. He reached out, fingers brushing the surface, and the reflection rippled, not like water, but like the mirror itself had breathed. I yelled at him to stop, but his hand was already sinking in. The glass swallowed him halfway before he screamed. Denise grabbed his arm, pulling, but it was like trying to drag someone out of mud. The mirror flexed, the frame creaking, and then Mark was gone. Denise fell back, sobbing, her hands covered in a slick, translucent residue that evaporated seconds later. The reflection showed nothing now but the hallway behind us. Empty. Cold. I dragged her downstairs, both of us stumbling in the dark. We didn't stop until we reached the car. The moment we hit the main road, the radio started crackling. Faint at first, then clearer, like someone whispering. A woman's voice. I couldn't make out the words, just the sound of breathing between each phrase. Denise screamed and turned it off. We drove all the way back to town without saying another word. The police searched the next day. They found no sign of Mark or Tyler, just our footprints in the dust and one strange detail. The mirror was gone. The whole hallway where it had stood was stripped bare, wallpaper torn away as if something had been pulled through from the inside. They ruled it an accident, said the boys must have run off, but Denise never believed that. She stopped talking after that night, moved away 2 months later. I stayed in Nacogdoches long enough to finish school, though I never went back down that road again. Last year, on a trip through Jasper, I stopped at an antique shop off the highway. The place was filled with old furniture and mirrors leaned against the walls, reflecting one another in endless loops. I almost walked right past it. A tall gilt mirror cracked across the corner, its frame black with age. My chest locked up before I even realized why. The tag read Provenance, Harper Estate, Nacogdoches County. The owner noticed me staring and said, "Strange thing, that one. Every time I clean it, it fogs right back up, like someone's breathing on the other side." When I caught my reflection, there was a faint shape standing behind me. White, blurred, almost touching my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I just walked out, and as I did, I swear I heard the faintest sound follow me. The slow creak of footsteps on an old wooden floor, pacing just a little closer each time. The house sat half a mile off County Road 104, just outside Lampasas, where the cedar trees huddled close together and the air always smelled faintly of iron and dust. The rancher's name was Earl Sutton, a man in his 50s who'd inherited the land from his father and had finally decided to tear down the old farmhouse that had been standing there since before the war. It was a crooked 2-story structure with gray planks and a tin roof that rattled in the wind. No one had lived in it for decades. Earl had used it for storage, keeping old tools and feed sacks inside, but after a section of the porch caved in, he figured it was time to start over. He hired 2 men from town, both locals, and brought in a small excavator. They started early one morning in late July. The sun came up heavy and orange, and by noon the men were sweating through their shirts. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the smell of rot and something faintly chemical like old paint or mildew. Earl worked alongside them, prying boards, knocking out nails, hauling scraps to the burn pile. By mid-afternoon, they had cleared most of the first floor, except for one strange section near the back of the house. It was a narrow hall that ended in a staircase. Earl had seen it before but never paid much attention to it. The stairs went up to what should have been the attic, but the top was sealed with nailed planks. His father had told him years ago that the attic was unsafe, that it had been closed off sometime after the Depression when the roof started to sag. Earl figured it was just empty space. But as they pulled the last of the drywall down, one of the men called out to him. The light from the open window hit the stairs just right, revealing muddy footprints on the first few steps. The tracks looked fresh, as if someone had walked up there recently. Earl frowned and ran his hand along the banister. It was dusty everywhere except for a clean streak where fingers had gripped the rail. They all stood there for a moment, quiet except for the hum of the cicadas outside. "Someone been up there?" one of the workers asked. Earl shook his head. "No one's been in this place for years." The other man pointed at the footprints. "Then where'd those come from?" Earl didn't answer. He climbed the first few steps, testing them with his boot. They creaked but held. Up close, he saw the boards sealing the attic were old but sturdy, nailed in a double layer across the frame. Something about it bothered him. The boards weren't placed from the inside as he would have expected. They'd been nailed from below, as if someone had wanted to keep something from coming down. He told the men to grab a crowbar. They hesitated, but he laughed it off and said he just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything valuable up there before the demolition. When he pried off the first plank, a dry gust of air came out, heavy with the smell of earth and old leather. Dust floated down in lazy swirls. The men stepped back. Earl kept working, pulling one board after another until a dark hole gaped above the stairs. He lifted his flashlight and pointed it upward. The beam caught something immediately. 2 muddy boots sitting on the top step, toes pointed toward the sealed opening. They were worn and cracked, the kind of boots you'd see on a ranch hand. There was no one in them. They just sat there side by side facing the door. One of the men muttered a curse under his breath. Earl climbed another step, shining the light around. The attic itself was empty. The boards beyond the boots were bare, the rafters covered in cobwebs. No footprints, no dust trails, nothing that explained why those boots were there or how someone could have walked up and vanished. He reached out to touch one, but before his fingers brushed the leather, he heard a sound, a faint thump like something shifting inside the wall. He froze, listening. It came again from behind the planks of the attic. A slow, deliberate scrape as if something was dragging across the wood. "Y'all hear that?" he whispered. Both men nodded but didn't move. The sound stopped. Then came a new one. A faint breath just beyond the boards. That was enough for them. The 2 workers backed down the hall and told Earl they'd wait outside. He didn't blame them. His skin was crawling, but curiosity got the better of him. He climbed one more step, close enough now to see that the boots were damp. Mud smeared across the edge of the step, but the floor around them was bone dry. He leaned forward, flashlight trembling slightly, and saw a faint handprint in the dust near the boots. It was small, almost childlike, pressed deep enough to leave ridges. When he pulled back, the wood groaned again. One long, slow creak that came from inside the attic itself. Earl stumbled down the stairs and hurried outside. He told the men to take a break, that he'd check it later. They looked relieved and lit cigarettes near the truck. Earl stood by the porch, staring at the house. The windows reflected the bright sky, but upstairs, behind the boards he'd pried loose, he thought he saw movement. A shadow passing once, then gone. That night, Earl couldn't stop thinking about it. Around midnight, he drove back out there alone. The fields were quiet, the moonlight pale over the cedar trees. He parked by the gate and walked up to the house with his flashlight. The air was colder than it should have been. Inside, the house was still. The smell of dust and old wood filled the air. He walked to the staircase, half expecting to see those boots gone. But they were still there, glinting faintly under his light. He climbed slowly, each step echoing. The air felt thicker near the top, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. He crouched beside the boots and finally reached out to touch them. The leather was damp, cool. As his fingers brushed them, he heard a whisper, soft, almost like a sigh coming from the dark gap above. He froze, flashlight shaking. Then something moved behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing. Just the narrow hallway stretching back to the kitchen, his own shadow trembling on the wall. He turned back to the boots, but they had shifted. They now faced him. Earl stumbled backward and nearly fell. His heart hammered. He pointed the light up again, but the attic was still empty. Then came that dragging sound again, this time louder, closer. The boards above flexed slightly, dust drifting down in thin streams. He bolted out of the house into the night, not stopping until he reached his truck. He didn't go back until morning. When he returned with the crew, the boots were gone. Just a faint outline of mud remained on the top step. The men refused to go inside again, so Earl told them to work around that section. They pulled the house down in pieces over the next 2 days. On the final morning, as the excavator tore through the back wall, one of the men shouted. Earl ran over and saw what the machine had uncovered. Another staircase buried inside the wall. It was narrow, unfinished, leading down into the earth. The first few steps were intact, and at the bottom, half covered in dirt, was a single boot. They stopped work after that. Earl filled the hole with gravel and concrete himself, never saying another word about it. He sold the property a year later and moved closer to town. Sometimes, though, he drives past that stretch of County Road 104 at dusk. The new owners built a barn where the old house once stood. It's neat, clean, with a fresh coat of paint. But every now and then, when the sun's just setting, he swears he can see something through the slats, a faint shape standing where the old staircase used to be, as if waiting for someone to open the door again. When the two of them pushed through the warped back door of the old house on McCaney Road, it was already close to midnight. The air inside was thick with that dusty, suffocating smell of insulation and mildew. Ryan flicked his flashlight across the living room walls, which were bloated and peeling in strips, while Jenna trailed behind with her phone camera held high, whispering commentary to the viewers of their small urban exploration channel. The house was listed as condemned years ago after a fire in the front rooms, but the rear half was strangely intact. The wooden floors warped but not caved. The neighborhood outside was silent except for the wind in the pine trees and the occasional groan from the old roof settling under its own weight. They'd heard stories about this place. Locals called it the baby house because of what a demolition crew claimed to find years ago when they first tried to tear it down. A burnt crib in the middle of a room that shouldn't have had power but did. Supposedly, someone found a baby monitor plugged into a wall socket that wasn't connected to any wiring. The crew walked off the job that day and the house had been left to rot since. Jenna joked about it while recording, panning the phone across the charred walls. Maybe we'll catch some ghostly nursery rhymes. Ryan didn't laugh. He'd heard the same rumors, but something about the story didn't sit right. He'd grown up near Tyler and remembered when the local paper ran a short piece about a house fire and a missing child. The name escaped him, but it was enough to make him uneasy. They moved through the kitchen where blackened pots still hung on the walls, fused to metal hooks by rust. A faded calendar from 2008 drooped above the sink. The smell grew worse as they neared the hallway, like old water and scorched plastic. Ryan shined his light down it, and at the very end was a room with its door half open. The wallpaper there was different. Pale blue with small faded shapes that looked like moons and stars. That must be it, Jenna said softly. She moved ahead, stepping carefully to avoid the soft spots in the floor. The air got noticeably colder. When she pushed the door fully open, a wave of dust shimmered through the beam of her phone's light. The room was small and almost bare except for a rusted crib frame in one corner and a nightstand beside it. A tangled cord hung from the wall socket, leading to a baby monitor sitting on the floor. Its plastic casing was yellowed, the antenna bent sideways. Ryan's flashlight trembled slightly in his grip as he crouched next to it. The plug was firmly in the outlet, but when he tugged at the cord, the outlet plate came loose from the wall, revealing an empty hole. No wires, no power. He sat back on his heels. "It's dead," he muttered. "There's nothing behind it." Jenna was already framing the shot. "Get this on video. People are gonna love it." As if in response, the baby monitor hissed to life. A sharp burst of static crackled through the tiny speaker, making both of them flinch. Ryan jumped up, staring down at it. The power light was glowing faintly red. "Is it battery-powered?" Jenna whispered. He shook his head. "That thing's 20 years old, maybe more. It shouldn't even..." The static shifted, forming a rhythm, then faded into something that sounded almost like words buried under the noise. They leaned in close. Through the fuzz came a low, drawn-out whisper that seemed to stretch across every syllable. "She's not asleep yet." Ryan looked up at Jenna. "Did you hear that?" She nodded slowly, backing away. "It said something about sleep, right?" He crouched again, trying to convince himself there was a logical reason. Maybe interference from a nearby house, a truck radio, or some shortwave signal. But the voice came again, clearer this time, as if it was responding to their silence. "She's not asleep yet." The voice was female, soft but deliberate, and it carried a strange tenderness like a mother soothing a child. Ryan's heart pounded as he reached down and yanked the plug out of the wall. The red light stayed on. Jenna whispered, "Oh my God." He dropped the monitor. It hit the floor with a dull clatter and went silent for a moment. Then, without warning, the static returned, louder, more frantic, and the voice changed. No longer calm, but strained and hurried. "She's not asleep yet. Keep her quiet. Please, she's not asleep yet." Ryan took a step back toward the hall, his light catching the edges of something on the far wall. The wallpaper near the crib wasn't just decorated, it was smeared. He moved closer, shining the beam over it. There were handprints, small ones overlapping each other in long streaks of pale dust. It looked like a child had dragged her fingers along the wall over and over. Jenna had stopped filming. Her phone was down at her side, She was staring at the crib, where a faint shape seemed to move beneath the corroded frame, as if something small was shifting under the thin layer of soot. Ryan's voice broke. "We should go." But the monitor hissed louder and the voice rose into a pleading whimper. "She's not asleep yet, don't wake her." Then everything cut out. No static, no light, just dead silence. They stood frozen for a few seconds before Ryan turned toward the door. When his flashlight hit the hall, it caught something new. A faint glow at the end of it, like another light flickering in the kitchen. It pulsed softly, yellowish and uneven, like the glow of an old bulb. "Someone's here," Jenna whispered. They crept back down the hall, every floorboard crying under their steps. The kitchen light blinked once and went out. But when Ryan swung the flashlight that way, the baby monitor's twin receiver sat on the counter, glowing red. The one that was supposed to be in the parents' room. Jenna's phone was shaking in her hand now. "That wasn't there when we came in." Ryan reached for it, hesitating only a moment before touching the power switch. The instant his finger brushed it, both monitors screamed in unison, a burst of shrill static that flooded the room. Over the noise came the same voice, screaming now, warped and echoing as if recorded through layers of distortion. "She's not asleep yet, keep her quiet, she's not asleep yet, she's not asleep." Ryan grabbed Jenna's arm, dragging her toward the back door. They stumbled into the night air, gasping, hearts hammering as the noise followed them until they hit the driveway. The moment they crossed the property line, it stopped. They didn't speak until they were halfway back to the truck. Jenna turned to glance at the house. All the windows were dark except one upstairs. A faint glow flickered behind the glass, orange like a candle. For a brief second, she swore she saw a small silhouette move across it. They drove back to town in silence, neither of them saying what they both felt. That the voice hadn't been a recording, that the phrase wasn't random. When Jenna uploaded the footage 2 days later, the audio track was almost useless. The voice was gone, replaced by static bursts that seemed to form shapes in the sound waves like faces pressing against the noise. That night, while editing, she left the footage running and went to the kitchen. When she came back, the monitor segment was playing on loop. Every time the static cut in, it sounded like a whisper beneath it, faint but growing clearer with each repetition. "She's not asleep yet." Jenna froze. The words were now perfectly audible through her headphones, even though she'd deleted the original audio. She tore them off and sat back, staring at the screen. The waveform was pulsing on its own, growing taller, sharper, as if something was speaking through the software itself. She reached for the mouse to close the program. A soft, high-pitched tone filled the room like feedback from a nearby speaker. She turned toward the hallway and saw a dim red light glowing from the floor near the power outlet. It was the same kind of light the baby monitor had, and from somewhere within that quiet apartment, through the hiss of static so faint it was almost like breathing, came the voice again, closer this time, whispering with a dreadful certainty, "She's not asleep yet." The house on the edge of Kerrville wasn't remarkable at first glance. It was small, with faded blue paint that had peeled in strips like old sunburned skin. The front yard was choked with Johnson grass, the porch sagged to one side, and the windows had been clouded for years by dust and spiderwebs. People in town said an old man named Wyatt lived there once, a craftsman who repaired things, clocks, radios, lamps, whatever people brought him. He never married, never had kids, and when he died, the house just sat. Nobody wanted to buy it after what was found inside. I was hired to clear it out, part of a small cleanup company that dealt with foreclosures and estate sales. The county wanted it emptied so they could auction it off. I didn't know the story then, just that the place was filled with decades of junk. I arrived early that morning, the sun just starting to push over the hills. Kerrville was quiet, that kind of stillness you get in rural Texas before the heat wakes everything up. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The key the sheriff gave me jammed in the lock. The door creaked open and stale air rolled out, thick with the smell of oil, wood shavings, and something faintly sweet, like old fruit left in a jar. The living room was packed with furniture covered in sheets. There were boxes stacked in corners, labeled in neat handwriting, tools, parts, clock gears. Every wall had shelves lined with jars of screws and nails sorted by size. I remember thinking how organized it all was for an old man living alone. It took me a few hours to clear the front rooms, but every time I moved deeper into the house, I noticed something strange, the faint clinking of glass like something shifting behind the walls. I thought it might be rats knocking over jars. The hallway led to a narrow door at the back, half hidden behind a tall cabinet. When I tugged it open, a wave of cool air hit me. The smell changed, less musty, more chemical, sharp, and metallic. There was a light switch, but it didn't work. I had my flashlight. The beam fell on rows of mason jars lining the walls from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of them, maybe more, stacked in hand-built shelves that filled the entire room. Every jar had something inside. Some had hair, dark blonde, gray, curled tightly and stuffed to the lid. Others had fingernail clippings, long and yellowed. But what froze me were the Polaroids. Every few jars contained one. Each photo showed a person sleeping, some in beds, some in cars, one even in what looked like a hospital room. The lighting in them was always dim, like they were taken at night. And every face was different. None of the jars were labeled. There was no dust on them. Someone had been coming in here long after Wyatt died. I backed out slowly, my heart pounding. I tried to tell myself it was a collection thing, some old superstition. Maybe he worked in a nursing home and took those photos as art. But that didn't explain the hair and nails. It felt ritualistic. I told myself I'd just finish the job fast, report the jars, and let the county handle it. That night, after locking up, I went home to my apartment on the outskirts of town. I couldn't stop thinking about the faces. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, mouths slightly open, breathing deep, completely unaware someone was close enough to photograph them. I got up at one point and checked my phone gallery, half expecting to find a photo of myself asleep. There wasn't one, but I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I returned with my co-worker, James. He was the type who joked through everything. I told him about the jars, but he just laughed. "Old guy probably had a hair fetish or something," he said, pushing past me. When he opened the door to the jar room, the air was colder than before, like a refrigerator left open. He shined his flashlight around and whistled. Damn, he was busy, huh? He picked up one of the jars and held it up to the light. Inside was a Polaroid of a young woman lying in a bed. Her eyes were shut, her face peaceful. James frowned. "You see this? Look at the background. That wallpaper." He pointed at the photo. The wallpaper behind her headboard was faded yellow with blue flowers. My stomach dropped. I knew that pattern. I'd seen it in one of the front rooms, Wyatt's bedroom. We found more like it. Dozens. Some of the people were clearly in his house. Same walls, same curtains. I checked the timestamp on the back of one. It said 1987. Another said 2009. That made no sense. Wyatt had died in 1998. James started to get quiet after that. He said he wanted to take one of the Polaroids to show the sheriff, but I told him not to. Something about the place felt wrong, like we shouldn't touch anything. The hairs on my arms were standing straight up. We left and called it in. Sheriff Walters came by that afternoon. He was old, gray-bearded, and tired-looking. The kind of man who's seen too much of everything. He went into the room, came back out after about 10 minutes and told us both to wait outside. We did. He made a few calls, then asked us to stay put until forensics came. While we stood by the truck, James kept glancing at the house. "You think he killed them?" he whispered. "All those people?" I didn't answer. I didn't know what to think. A few days later, I got a call from the sheriff's office. They asked me to come in. The deputy said they'd identified some of the people in the Polaroids. A couple were locals who'd gone missing years ago. Others were from out of state, but most couldn't be matched to anyone. What chilled me was when the deputy asked if anyone had been inside the house since our cleanup. I said no. He nodded slowly and said the photos had changed. I asked what he meant. He said the new prints showed different people. Not just different, but recent. Faces they recognized from town. People alive and accounted for. That night I dreamed I was standing in that jar room again. The air hummed faintly, and the jars rattled like they were breathing. the Polaroids. On the shelves weren't still anymore. They moved slightly like video clips frozen mid-motion. In one of them, a person stirred in their sleep and opened their eyes, staring straight into the camera. I woke up covered in sweat, the taste of dust and metal in my mouth. 2 weeks later, James disappeared. His truck was found abandoned near the river, keys still inside. The sheriff searched for days, but they didn't find a trace of him. When I asked if they'd checked the jars again, the deputy just looked away. I couldn't stay in Kerrville after that. I left, took a job out near Del Rio, and tried to forget. But sometimes when I pass old houses or see stacks of mason jars in thrift stores, I feel that same cold air brush against my neck. About a year ago, I got a small padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was my apartment bedroom, shot from the doorway. I was asleep in the photo, mouth slightly open, arm over the blanket. In the bottom right corner, written in shaky pencil, were 2 words, jar room. When Ben and Lisa moved to Amarillo, they wanted something simple. A house with character, a yard big enough for their dog, and a place they could make their own. They found it on the edge of town, a 2-story 1950s house with faded yellow siding, leaning slightly toward the wind. The realtor called it a fixer-upper but said it had good bones. They didn't mind the work. They liked the idea of peeling back time. The first week, Lisa began stripping the wallpaper in the upstairs hallway. The pattern was an old floral design, roses on cream, but beneath it, she found something strange. A painted face, crudely done, staring out from the plaster beneath. It was childlike but unsettling, the proportions just a little off, the smile too wide. She called Ben upstairs and they both stared at it, half amused, half uneasy. Must have been some kid's project, Ben said. Or maybe someone just painted over an old mural. They laughed it off and kept going. But beneath that first layer was another face. And another, each smaller than the one before, as if whoever painted them had done so over and over again, each time tighter and more desperate. The faces began to distort, their eyes sinking deeper, the mouths thinning, the features pressed together like they were being squeezed by invisible hands. By the time Lisa reached the plaster, her arms were trembling. Her scraper hit something that wasn't paint. It was a word carved into the wall, Rebecca, and next to it a date, 1968. The plaster around the letters was gouged deep as though done with a knife. She felt cold all at once. The air in the hallway seemed heavier. When Ben touched her shoulder, she flinched. They searched online that night, trying to find something about the house's history. Nothing turned up. The property record started in 1973, when the previous owners bought it from a bank. There were no earlier details, no mention of a Rebecca. They went to bed uneasy but told themselves it was just a name. Maybe the daughter of a former owner? People used to personalize walls before drywall became common. The next morning, Lisa woke to the sound of something scratching. It came from the hallway. When she opened the door, she saw the new paint bubbling slightly where the carved name had been. The wallpaper scrapings they had bagged were scattered across the floor as if someone had pawed through them. She thought the dog had gotten into it until she realized the door to the hallway had been closed all night. That night, Ben heard it too. Faint, rhythmic scraping like a nail against plaster. He got up with a flashlight and walked into the hallway. The beam washed over the walls, and for a split second he thought he saw movement. A faint shifting under the surface of the paint. When he touched it, the wall was cold, almost damp. The next day, Lisa tried to distract herself by working in the kitchen, but her eyes kept drifting up the stairs. She felt drawn there, as though something waited just beyond sight. That afternoon, she called her neighbor, an older woman named June who'd lived across the street since the 70s. June was polite but hesitant. When Lisa asked if she knew anything about the house, there was a pause on the line. Then June said quietly, "That place used to belong to the Merrills. They had a little girl. She went missing in the summer of '68. No one ever found her." Lisa's heart dropped. "Was her name Rebecca?" There was silence, then a soft, "Yes." That evening, Ben came home from work to find Lisa sitting in the hallway staring at the wall. She'd stripped more paint off, revealing the smallest face yet. It was barely the size of her palm, but it looked alive. Eyes darting, lips curled in a silent scream. "Lisa, stop," he said, but she didn't answer. Her scraper moved slowly. Rhythmically, as if she couldn't stop herself, he grabbed her wrist and she turned to him, dazed, her pupils wide. "It's her," she whispered. "She's in the wall." Ben forced her to stop for the night. They covered the wall with a tarp and went to bed without speaking. Around 3 a.m., Lisa woke to whispering. At first, she thought it was the wind through the window cracks, but then she recognized words. Soft, pleading ones. "Let me out." She turned on the lamp, but the sound stopped instantly. Ben stirred beside her, unaware. She sat in silence for a long time, staring at the dark hallway. The following morning, Ben found Lisa gone. The tarp was on the floor. The wall was bare. Every bit of paint had been stripped down to raw plaster. The carved name was still there, but deeper now, as if freshly cut. Next to it, a small dark stain spread down the wall like moisture. He followed the trail down to the baseboard and saw that it seeped into the floorboards. He called for Lisa, panic rising. Her phone lay on the stairs, screen cracked. The house was silent except for the faint sound of dripping. He called the police after an hour of searching. They combed the house but found no sign of her. No forced entry, no tracks, nothing. One of the officers noted the wall and muttered that it looked like something had been wet recently. They took statements and left, promising to return with a search team. That night, Ben couldn't sleep. He sat in the hallway with a flashlight, staring at the wall where she'd been working. He whispered her name over and over as if somehow she could hear him. Just after midnight, he saw it. A faint outline beneath the plaster, another face forming. It was smaller than the rest, so small he had to lean close to see it clearly. It was Lisa's, her eyes painted wide with terror, her mouth pressed into silence. His hand trembled as he touched the wall. It was soft like wet clay. He stumbled back, heart pounding. The air filled with a whisper that seemed to come from all around him, rising in layers, overlapping voices, childlike, desperate, endless. He ran from the house barefoot into the cold night. The neighbors saw him wandering the street at dawn, muttering about faces and voices in the walls. The police came again, but the wall was smooth when they checked it, freshly painted as if no one had ever touched it. They said grief could make people see things. They searched for Lisa for months but never found her. Eventually, Ben stopped talking about the house altogether. Years later, when a new family bought it, they began their own renovations. On the first day, the husband called his wife upstairs. He had peeled back a section of wallpaper near the hallway landing. Beneath it, faint but visible, were painted faces. Layer after layer, each smaller, each tighter, each more desperate. At the bottom, carved deep into the plaster, was a new name. Lisa. And just beneath it, in shakier letters, another word had been added, as though by a trembling hand. Help. Deputy Caleb Wexler had been in law enforcement for 12 years, and in all that time he'd learned one thing above all else. Houses remember. Not in a ghost story kind of way, though he'd heard his share from old-timers and drunks. No, he meant in the way drywall holds cigarette smoke, in the way floors creak a certain way when they've seen too much weight, in the way dust collects differently in corners where people cried or fought. That kind of memory. The kind you feel, not see. So when he got the call about an abandoned teardown in South Austin, slated for demolition but attracting trespassers, he went in with that gut sense already tingling that something wasn't right. The place sat near the edge of a new development, where shiny prefab houses were slowly replacing old 70s bungalows. The lawn was dead. The porch sagged. A demolition notice flapped from a nail in the front door. Caleb kicked it open just enough to step inside. The smell hit him first, mildew and thyme. Wallpaper peeled like dead skin. Insulation poked through holes in the walls and light filtered in through broken blinds, slicing the dust into floating strips. He moved room by room, shining his flashlight, checking for squatters or copper thieves. Nothing living. In the back bedroom, beneath a half-collapsed dresser, he found the box. It was old but not ancient, the kind of cardboard box you'd buy from a moving company. It had a faded label across the top in blue pen. Photos. 1976, 1992. Inside were stacks of glossy pictures, neatly rubber-banded, the corners curled and edges soft from years of handling. The first stack showed a normal family. A man, a woman, 2 kids, and a boy about 12, a girl maybe 8. They smiled in front of a Christmas tree at a swimming pool at the UT football stadium at Barton Springs. The man had a thick mustache. the kind every dad in the late 80s seemed to have. The woman wore big glasses and bright lipstick. Ordinary people frozen in time. He flipped through a few more. Then one caught his attention. The family stood in the living room of the same house he was in now. The wallpaper behind them matched the peeling pattern on the wall across from him. Same curtains, same cracked doorframe. He felt a weird pull in his gut, like the photo was trying to line up with the real world. He sealed the box and brought it back to the station, logging it as found property. He meant to toss it into evidence storage and forget about it, but that night curiosity got the better of him. He opened it again in his office under the fluorescent light and started sorting the stacks. Something was off. Not with the photos themselves, but with what they showed. In the first picture from the pile, the father was smiling, hand on his son's shoulder. In the next one, taken maybe seconds later, his smile had flattened. In the next, his eyes looked slightly off-center, as if he wasn't looking at the camera anymore, but at something behind it. Caleb squinted, thinking it might have been a trick of exposure or light. He kept flipping. The little girl, who had been grinning in the first few, now looked tired, then frightened. Then in the next one, her mouth was open. Her face blurred slightly, as if she had moved just as the picture was taken. The mother's lipstick smudge changed shape between shots, like she'd been speaking, but when Caleb looked closely, he realized her mouth was open in the exact same O shape in every later picture, like she was caught mid-scream. He dropped the stack and leaned back. The photos weren't old Polaroids. They were printed, glossy Kodak film. There was no way they should change, but something about them did. He brought them home that night anyway, thinking maybe he'd been staring too long at screens and needed sleep. He left the box on his kitchen counter and went to bed. The next morning, when he poured coffee and glanced at the photos again, he froze. The family was still there, but the backgrounds were darker. The windows behind them were no longer bright. In one photo, the boy's face was turned slightly away, his eye sockets dark. He didn't tell anyone. What was he supposed to say? The pictures are different? They'd think he'd been drinking. He hadn't touched a drop in 4 years. By the end of the week, things got worse. Each day, the expressions shifted more. The smiles vanished completely. The mother's mouth was fully open now, the lipstick smeared halfway to her cheek. The boy was no longer visible in one frame, just a blur behind his father. The little girl's eyes were rolled upward, showing only whites. Caleb took them to the evidence locker that morning and sealed the box again. He tagged it, filled the form, and shoved it onto a back shelf. Out of sight. That night he was called out on a domestic disturbance near Riverside. After the arrest, he came back to file his report and noticed the evidence room light was on. It shouldn't have been. He went inside. The box was on the floor open. The lid lay a few feet away. The photos were spread out like someone had been rifling through them. But no one else had access, only him. He knelt and picked one up. This time his stomach twisted so hard he nearly gagged. The father, mother, and daughter were huddled in a corner of what looked like this very evidence room. Their mouths were open wide, black inside, as if screaming soundlessly. And in the corner of the image, faintly visible in the polished metal shelf, was a reflection, his own face. He dropped it, backed out of the room, locked it, and left for the night without finishing his report. That weekend, he drove to Bastrop, to an old photo lab he remembered his uncle using back in the day. The owner, an old man with trembling hands, still ran the place. Caleb brought 3 of the pictures and asked if the man could check if they'd been tampered with. Maybe double exposures, maybe Photoshop. The old man laughed at that, said, "Photoshop doesn't touch film, son." He looked at the pictures, squinted, and frowned. "These ain't right," he said after a minute. "Color's fine, exposure's fine, but the negatives don't match what's printed. See here, the light fall-off's different. Means they were redeveloped, but you can't redevelop film without the negative being soaked again, and that'd destroy it." Caleb asked him what that meant. The old man just shook his head. "Means the picture changed after it was printed. Don't make sense, but there it is." That night, Caleb dreamed of flashbulbs popping in a dark room. He stood somewhere he couldn't quite see, and each flash illuminated faces pressed against glass, mouths open in silent screams. When he woke, his shirt was damp with sweat. Monday morning, he went back to the evidence locker to destroy the box. He had no authorization, but he didn't care. When he opened the door, his heart nearly stopped. The photos were gone. Every last one. The box was still there, but empty. He checked the log. No entry since his own. He called the other deputies, but no one had touched it. That night, as he sat at his kitchen table trying to calm his nerves, he noticed something pinned to his fridge. A single photograph. He didn't remember putting it there. It was of his kitchen, same table, same coffee mug, same light. Only he was in the picture, sitting where he sat now, looking at the camera with a blank face. He ripped it down, stuffed it into a drawer, and went to bed with the lights on. But sleep didn't come easy. Around 2 a.m, he heard the faint click of a camera shutter from somewhere in the house. Then another. Then a third. He sat up, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The next day, he drove to the demolition site where the house once stood. It had been leveled to the foundation, nothing but concrete and rebar left. He stood in the middle of the lot, wind whipping dust around his boots, and for a moment thought he heard something beneath it. A faint whirring, like an old film reel. When he returned home that evening, his front door was ajar. He drew his gun, entered slowly, and saw photographs covering his living room wall. Dozens of them. His photos, his life, him at the grocery store, walking to his car, standing outside the station, sleeping in his bed. Some were recent, the same clothes he wore that week. But in every photo, his eyes were rolled back white. His mouth hung open. He backed toward the door. On the floor by the coffee table sat his own camera, one he hadn't used in years. The lens was fogged, the flash cracked, but it was still warm. The little red light blinked once, then twice, then stopped. The next morning, the sheriff found Caleb's cruiser still parked in his driveway. Engine off, door open. The house was empty. Only the photographs remained. In the last one, found face down on the kitchen counter, a new image had appeared overnight. The same family from the Austin teardown stood smiling again, bright and clear, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Beside them, half in frame, was Caleb, his arm around the father's shoulder, grinning for the camera. The demolition crew was already late that morning, their trucks idling on the edge of the dry lot while the sun climbed above the scrub trees. The house on South Lamesa Road had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up, the porch sagging into the clay. Neighbors said it used to belong to an old writer named Arthur Mallory, who'd gone missing sometime in the late 90s. Nobody seemed to know if he'd moved away or just vanished into the desert. His name had been painted on the mailbox once, but the paint had long since flaked off, leaving only faint outlines like a ghost of handwriting. Inside, the place smelled of rot and insulation. The foreman, Carl, pushed open the door and was hit with a gust of air that was strangely cool, though the day outside was already burning. Dust swirled through the light from a cracked window, and somewhere in the walls a soft scratching echoed. Probably mice, he thought. The furniture had been hauled out months ago by the city, but one thing remained in the center of the empty living room. An old Remington typewriter sitting neatly on a table that looked far too clean for the state of the rest of the house. The keys were spotless, though the rest of it was covered in dust, and a sheet of paper was rolled in halfway, a single sentence typed dead center on the page. He's still in the walls. Carl called over one of the younger guys, a kid named Danny, who had the habit of taking photos of everything weird on his phone. Probably some local prank, Carl muttered, flicking the edge of the paper. But it didn't move. It looked freshly fed through the rollers, the ink still dark and wet like someone had just typed it that morning. The kid leaned close, frowning. "That's creepy as hell," he said. They shrugged it off, decided to leave the thing alone until they could start tearing down the structure. But by the next morning, when they returned to begin the demolition, there was a new sheet in the typewriter. The old one had been neatly pulled free and set beside it on the table. The new page read, "Stop hitting the walls. He can hear you." Danny swore he'd locked the place when they left, and Carl had kept the only key. The windows were still boarded. No footprints led in or out across the layer of dust on the floor. Yet the keys of the typewriter were again clean, the ribbon freshly struck. Carl stared at it for a long time before muttering that someone must have broken in through the crawlspace or attic. They didn't mention it to the other workers. Carl wanted the job done, the house leveled. But as they began hammering away at the drywall, a low, hollow knocking answered from inside the studs. Everyone froze. Carl laughed it off, saying it was air or pressure shifting. But when they pulled away a section near the back room, they found more writing, not typed, but carved into the wooden beams behind the plaster. The same words. He's still in the walls. That night, Carl couldn't sleep. He told himself it was just stress, but he kept picturing the words, the fresh ink, the scratches on the beams. Around 2 in the morning, his phone buzzed. It was Danny whispering from the site. "You gotta come down here," he said. "I saw a light inside. The typewriter's going crazy." Carl cursed, got dressed, and drove out there. The lot was silent when he arrived, but as he stepped through the half-torn doorway, he could hear it. The rapid metallic clatter of keys striking paper. Tap, 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 tap. He rounded the corner, flashlight trembling, and saw the typewriter hammering on its own. Each key pressed and lifted like invisible fingers were working it. A new message was slowly forming. "Stop, you're waking him." Carl yanked the sheet free and shouted for Danny, but the kid wasn't answering. His flashlight beam caught something on the far wall, a section of plaster that was moving, pulsing slightly like there was something alive underneath it. The air smelled sharp and metallic like old blood. Then the house went quiet again. The typewriter stopped mid-sentence, one key still pressed down. The police were called when Carl stumbled out into the yard screaming that Danny was gone. They searched the house for hours but found nothing. Not a trace of him. Just the typewriter still sitting there, a new page loaded. The words this time were spaced neatly, patient and cold. "I told you not to wake him." The city sealed off the property for investigation, but the case went nowhere. They called it an accident. Said the kid probably ran off. After a few weeks, the police cleared it, and the house was finally demolished. The rubble was cleared, the lot leveled. Nothing was left but dry dirt and the ghost of a foundation. A few months later, a man named Greg Holloway bought the land cheap and parked his trailer there. He worked nights at the refinery. Quiet man, didn't know the story. On his 3rd morning living there, he came out to make coffee and stopped cold. Sitting at his kitchen table was an old Remington typewriter, gray and dustless, with a single sheet rolled in halfway. The line on it read, "He's still in the walls." Greg sold the trailer 2 days later and left town without collecting his last paycheck. Nobody ever saw him again. The trailer still stands on that empty lot, and people driving down South La Mesa Road swear they can see light flickering inside around 3 a.m. The faint tapping sound of keys, steady as a heartbeat, coming from nowhere anyone can find. When the house on Willow Bend Drive was finally open for demolition, the first thing anyone noticed was the smell. Not the sharp rot of an animal, not mildew or mold, but a strange warm sweetness like syrup poured over something that had gone bad. The crew from the city said the property had been empty for over 20 years. The last owners, an older couple named the Reddingers, had both died within weeks of each other back in '98. Since then, the place had been tied up in estate disputes and slowly absorbed by vines and dust. The first people to go inside weren't the contractors, but a group of local urban explorers, college kids from Texas State, who made videos of forgotten places around San Marcos. They called themselves Abandoned Central Texas, and their thing was exploring homes, motels, and roadside churches left to rot. That afternoon, they found a way in through a kitchen window that had half shattered from age. Inside, the air was thick and unmoving. The walls were covered in a faded floral print, and the living room carpet had stiffened into something that looked like dried moss. They filmed everything with flashlights and whispered commentary, their voices bouncing around the dead space. One of them, a tall guy named Dylan, called out that there was something in the hallway closet, a shape behind the door. When he pulled it open, they found a reel-to-reel tape recorder sitting on a small stool. It was plugged into the wall even though the power meter outside had long been pulled. There was a single tape threaded through the reels, already wound to the end. Dust caked its surface, but the machine looked oddly intact, like someone had cleaned around it for years. As they looked closer, the tape began to move. Slowly at first, the reels turning with a dry, clicking rhythm, and then the speaker crackled alive with static. At first, they thought it was feedback from their flashlights or maybe a loose wire, but then a man's voice came through. It was shaky, hurried. "Don't look under the house." The room went still. The tape hissed, popped, and then repeated as if the loop had been spliced intentionally. "Don't look under the house." They thought it was a prank, maybe an old ghost hunting gimmick someone had left. But Dylan, who'd always been the one pushing deeper into crawl spaces and attics, said they should check anyway. He pointed to the vent grate near the back of the hallway that led under the floorboards. The opening was narrow, barely enough for one person to slide through. When they pried off the grate, a wave of stale heat rolled out, smelling of soil and something metallic. Dylan went first, crawling with his flashlight in his mouth. The others filmed from above, the camera catching the beam of light shifting between joists and insulation. After a minute, Dylan's voice came muffled through the dark. "There's something here. A box or something big," he grunted as he pulled debris aside. "Wait, it's not a box, it's a coffin." The group laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but when he didn't come back out, they lowered the camera into the opening. The lens caught a flash of polished wood below the pipes, almost perfectly rectangular, the kind of deep cherry color you'd see in a funeral home. Then Dylan said something that made everyone quiet. "It's open." He reached a hand toward it. "It's empty." Someone above asked if he was messing with them. Dylan didn't answer right away. Then his voice came again, lower, trembling. "It's warm." The sound on the camera became distorted after that, like the microphone was half submerged in static. The last thing the recording caught before cutting out was the noise of Dylan scrambling backward and whispering something no one could make out. When the police were called later that night, they found the camera lying beside the crawlspace vent. The battery was dead, the memory card half corrupted. Dylan was gone. The other three kids, Kara, Luis, and Andy, were waiting outside in shock, saying Dylan had never come out. The search teams went under the house the next day. There was no coffin. The soil beneath was freshly disturbed, as if someone had dug and filled it recently, but there was no sign of a grave or any human remains. The officers chalked it up to panic and rumor, said the explorers had probably staged the whole thing. But Kara swore she had touched the coffin herself when she tried to pull Dylan out. She said it wasn't made of wood but something softer, like leather stretched too tight. A week later, the city finished demolishing the house. The debris was cleared and trucked to a landfill south of town. Yet 2 months after, a man working the night shift at the landfill claimed he found something sitting on top of one of the newer piles. A reel-to-reel recorder, coated in dust, still plugged into an extension cord that ended in nothing. He said when he picked it up, the reel started turning again, playing the same words. "Don't look under the house." He turned it over, saw a piece of masking tape across the back with a name written in fading ink, D. Redinger. That name matched the husband of the couple who had lived there before they died. The coroner's report from 1998 said the wife, Agnes, had died of a heart attack, but her husband Daniel's cause of death was listed as inconclusive. His body had never been recovered. One of the old neighbors, when asked, told a story that no one took seriously at first. She said Agnes had told her that Daniel was obsessed with the noises under their floorboards in the weeks before she died. He claimed something was crawling beneath the house at night, whispering his name. He'd taken to recording the sounds on his tape machine, leaving it running overnight in the closet. Agnes found him one morning kneeling at the vent, saying he could hear breathing down there. When she begged him to stop, he told her that if he could just record it clearly, he'd prove he wasn't crazy. That night, the neighbor heard screams from the house and called the sheriff, but when deputies arrived, they found the front door locked and the lights off. Agnes was dead in her bed. Daniel was nowhere to be found. Now, 27 years later, Dylan's body was never found either. His friends dropped out of school soon after. Luis moved back to El Paso and stopped answering calls. Andy posted one last video saying he was done with the channel and that some things in Texas are better left buried. Kara hasn't been seen since last summer, but every few months, someone in San Marcos reports hearing a strange sound coming from the empty lot where the Redinger house once stood. Construction crews working nearby claim they hear the faint whir of a reel-to-reel turning in the dark, followed by that same line, quiet but clear, "Don't look under the house." And sometimes, if you stand there at night, near the rusted fence post that marks where the front steps used to be, you can feel heat rising from the ground, as if something beneath the soil is still warm. In Brownwood, the old Carter house had been standing empty for decades, its windows boarded up, its porch sagging like the jaw of something dead. Kids in town would whisper about it at the Sonic off Main Street, usually right around dusk when the cicadas started to die down and the night began to hum with that hollow, ghostly Texas quiet. The house sat just past a grove of cedar and hackberry trees at the end of a gravel lane, off FM 2374. Most of the grown-ups in town said to stay away. They'd shake their heads and mutter about kids getting hurt or lost, but no one ever really explained why. only that it wasn't a place for the living after dark. When I was 17, I didn't believe in much. I'd lost my mom a few years earlier. My dad had taken off for Odessa, and I spent more time with my friend Wyatt than anyone else. He was the kind of guy who laughed at anything that scared other people, and he had a way of making you feel like a coward if you didn't go along with his stupid dares. That summer, the big dare was the Carter house. The story was that if you went upstairs after midnight, you'd see the TV come on by itself. It didn't matter that there hadn't been electricity in that house since the early 90s. They said it glowed blue through the windows like something underwater, showing videos of people asleep in their beds. The creepy part was that none of those bedrooms existed in the house, and sometimes the people in the videos would wake up and stare straight at the camera before the screen went black. Wyatt wanted proof. He borrowed his brother's camcorder and talked me into going with him one Saturday night in July. We rode our bikes out there with 2 flashlights, a pack of cigarettes, and a single can of warm shiner he'd stolen from his dad's fridge. The air smelled like dust and mesquite, and the sound of our tires on gravel seemed too loud against the quiet. When the house finally came into view, it was darker than the trees behind it. The boards over the windows were old and warped, and the front door hung slightly open. We left the bikes by the gate and climbed the creaking porch steps. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and old wood. Every step made the floor groan. The wallpaper had peeled in long strips that curled like dead leaves. In the front room, a few beer cans and some spray-painted names on the wall showed that other people had been there before us. But it still felt untouched, like the kind of place time forgot on purpose. The stairs were on the right, rising into darkness. Wyatt panned the camcorder up toward them and whispered, "This is it. You ready?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We checked the downstairs first just to make sure no one else was in there. Every room was empty. There was an old kitchen with a rusted sink and a pile of fallen plaster near the back door. The only thing that stood out was a faint smell of ozone, like after a lightning strike, even though the air outside was dry. When we finally went upstairs, the steps bowed and creaked beneath our feet. The light from our flashlights caught a long hallway lined with doors on both sides. At the end of it, to the left, was a faint blue glow leaking from under a door. I remember Wyatt looking back at me with a grin, mouthing "holy shit" before he started filming. The door was half open and the light inside pulsed softly like a heartbeat. When we pushed it open, there it was. An old box television sitting against the wall, its screen humming with static. The strange thing was, it wasn't showing just snow. It looked like footage, grainy and shaky, of a bedroom. There was a bed, a dresser, and someone sleeping under a white sheet. It wasn't this house, though. The walls were painted blue and there were string lights on the ceiling, modern ones like you'd see in a dorm room. We watched in silence as the camera panned slowly around the sleeping figure. Then the person on the bed stirred, rolled over, and opened their eyes directly into the camera. I think both of us stopped breathing. The image flickered, distorted, then changed. Another bedroom appeared. This one looked like a cheap motel with stained curtains and a flickering lamp. A man was asleep in the bed, half turned away. After a few seconds, he rolled onto his back and started talking in his sleep, his lips moving without sound. Then he bolted upright, looking directly at the screen. The picture shook as if the person filming had taken a step back, and for a moment I thought I saw the outline of someone else standing behind him in the dark part of the frame. Something too tall and too still. The TV went black. Wyatt turned toward me, his face pale in the blue light. "You got that?" I asked. He didn't answer. The camcorder was still pointed at the TV, but his hands were trembling. Then the screen flashed again, and the room it showed this time made my stomach twist. It was my room. The exact layout, the posters on the wall, the lamp I'd left crooked on my nightstand. And in the bed under the covers was me. I was turned on my side, facing the wall, breathing softly. The camera on the TV moved closer to the bed, slow and deliberate. My own voice came through faintly from the speakers, a groan, a murmur. Then the version of me on the screen opened his eyes and turned over. He stared into the camera with the same half-awake confusion I was feeling at that exact moment. My flashlight slipped from my hand and hit the floor. Wyatt swore and took a step back. The camcorder clattered as he fumbled it. The air in the room had gone heavy, charged like just before a thunderstorm. I could feel a vibration under my shoes, faint but real. The TV began to hum louder. Then from somewhere behind the static, I heard my own voice whispering through the speaker. "Don't move." I froze. Wyatt looked at me, his face twisted in disbelief. The voice repeated, louder this time, with a sharp hiss on the last word. "Don't move." Then the screen cut to black again. Wyatt bolted for the door, and I followed, nearly tripping on the stairs as we tore down them. The front door slammed open, and we ran until the house disappeared behind the trees. Neither of us spoke until we reached the road. My chest burned, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Wyatt finally stopped, bent over, breathing hard. "We got it," he gasped, lifting the camcorder. "It's on tape." Except it wasn't. When we got back to his place and rewound the footage, all we heard was static. No blue light, no bedrooms, nothing. Just the sound of us breathing and the faint hum of silence. He tried again, fast-forwarding, rewinding, tapping the side of the camcorder. Nothing changed. He cursed and threw it on the couch. I didn't say a word. I just wanted to go home, take a shower, and forget it ever happened. But forgetting wasn't that easy. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flickering blue glow behind my eyelids. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. Sure, I'd heard something. The room was quiet except for the sound of my ceiling fan. Then I saw it, a faint blue light leaking under my bedroom door. My phone was dead. The air smelled like ozone again, sharp and electric. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the door. The light flickered once, twice, then faded. I didn't move until the sun came up. The next day, Wyatt didn't answer my texts. I rode over to his house around noon. His mom said he wasn't home, that he'd gone to stay with his brother in Coleman for a few days. She looked worried when she said it, her eyes darting toward his room. When I biked past his window, I saw his camcorder sitting on the desk. Through the thin curtains, I could see the little red recording light blinking, even though it wasn't plugged into anything. 2 weeks later, they found Wyatt's brother's trailer abandoned. Both of them gone. The only thing left behind was a TV sitting in the middle of the living room floor, still plugged in, its screen glowing faintly blue. The sheriff who went inside said it was showing static, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he saw faces moving in the snow. They locked up the place and wrote it off as a missing persons case. I moved away from Brownwood not long after that. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I swear I see a faint blue shimmer dance across the walls of whatever room I'm in. Once, at a motel in San Angelo, I turned on the TV just to drown out the silence, and the channel came up full of static, until a shaky picture faded in. It showed a small bedroom with a desk and an old Remington typewriter sitting on it. My stomach dropped. That was my room from college, a place I hadn't lived in years. The camera angle was low near the floor, and after a moment, a figure moved past the frame, a pair of legs, bare feet stopping right beside the bed. I reached for the remote, but it wouldn't respond. The blue light filled the room, and for a second I thought I saw my own reflection staring back at me from inside the screen, eyes open, mouth whispering something I couldn't hear. Then the TV went dark. I don't go near abandoned houses anymore, and I don't stay anywhere with a television in the room. But sometimes late at night I can still feel the hum under my feet, faint and familiar, like an old signal reaching out across the dark, waiting for someone to tune in. The farmhouse sat on the far edge of Waxahachie's forgotten county line, half swallowed by oak and mesquite, its roof sagging inward like a tired chest. The air inside was still, the kind of stillness that suggested everything in it had decided to stop breathing at once. When the county sent in the investigators, the first thing they noticed was the smell. Old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic, like rusted nails or dried blood. The second thing was the clock above the fireplace mantel. It had stopped. The hands were frozen at 3:17 a.m. The farmhouse had belonged to the Wessinger family, though no one in the nearby town had seen them for over a decade. Tax records showed the place was still in their name, but the mail piled up, the power company cut the line, and the grass grew tall enough to hide the front porch steps. A realtor had finally gone out to assess the property, only to run out of the house in the middle of the afternoon, pale and shaking, muttering something about the walls whispering. The county assumed she'd just let her imagination run wild, but when she mentioned the clock that wouldn't tick and the photographs that seemed wrong, the sheriff decided it was better to check. The inside of the farmhouse was undisturbed, like time had frozen in mid-motion. Plates on the table still held petrified scraps of food. A newspaper dated July 1978 lay open beside a cup stained brown by years of evaporation, and dust outlined where family photos had once stood before sliding slightly out of place. The fireplace held nothing but cold ash, and there, hanging just above it, was the clock. Its glass face fogged from the inside, hands unmoving, pendulum caught in mid-swing like it had tried to move and changed its mind. Deputy Ellis was the first to notice something odd. He pointed his flashlight toward a family photograph on the mantel. A smiling mother, father, and 2 children posing in front of the very same fireplace. Behind them, barely visible in the reflection on the glass, the clock showed 3:17 a.m. Ellis frowned, leaning closer. "You see that?" he asked. "That time?" The sheriff grunted and nodded. They checked another photo, same thing. A different year, different clothes, the kids older now, but the clock again frozen at 3:17. They pulled out more frames from the shelves, and each one showed the same haunting detail. No matter the season, no matter the year, every picture in that house had captured the clock at that exact moment, glowing faintly like it was alive. When the power was restored for testing, none of the outlets worked except one in the living room. They plugged in a lamp and it flickered violently before going dark. Then came the faintest sound and a slow, dragging tick. They turned to the fireplace. The clock had moved, just once. The pendulum swayed weakly before settling back into silence. The sheriff, a man too old for ghost stories, muttered that it was just the surge from the generator. He ordered Ellis to bag the clock for evidence, maybe to send it to the state lab in Austin. But the deputy hesitated. The closer he got, the colder the air became. His breath fogged as though he were standing in a freezer, though the Texas afternoon outside was 90 degrees. He wiped his sleeve across the glass, and for a moment, he thought he saw something behind his own reflection. It looked like another face staring back at him, pale and distant with eyes that didn't blink. He dropped the clock then, and the crash shattered the silence. When they looked down, the faceplate had cracked, and behind it, instead of gears and springs, there was something else. A layer of thin, black residue coating the interior, almost organic, pulsing faintly like it was breathing. The sheriff ordered the room sealed off. They took photographs and measurements, sent samples to the lab, and called it a day. But Ellis couldn't let it go. That night back at the station, he kept staring at the photo he'd taken of the clock before it fell. The timestamp on his camera said 3:17 a.m., even though he'd taken it around 5 in the afternoon. He checked the others. Every single one was marked the same. 2 days later, he went back alone. He told himself it was just to double-check evidence, but really it was to see if what he felt in that house had been real. The power was still cut. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something faintly sour. As he climbed the stairs, his flashlight began to fade. The batteries were new. He tapped it, and it came back just long enough to reveal the hallway ahead, lined with more framed photographs. Every single one was of the family. In each, they looked slightly different. Smaller smiles, wider eyes, more shadow. In the last one, the father's hand rested on the mantel and his expression was twisted like he'd been caught mid-scream. The clock behind him still read 3:17 a.m., but this time Ellis swore he saw the minute hand trembling. He heard something then, a faint chime, distant, muffled, like it came from behind the walls. It rang once, twice, then stopped. He turned toward the living room and the air grew colder again. The clock somehow was back on the mantel. The glass was whole, unbroken, the pendulum perfectly still. His flashlight flickered, and for a moment the room was lit only by the faint phosphorescent glow coming from the clock's face. 3:17 a.m. Ellis backed toward the door, trying to keep his eyes on it. Then something creaked upstairs. He froze. It was a slow, deliberate step, another and another. He whispered, "Hello?" But his voice sounded small, swallowed by the house. The steps stopped. Then somewhere near the stairwell, a faint voice spoke, high like a child's. "You're late." The clock chimed once more. The pendulum began to move, smooth and steady. Ellis turned and ran, stumbling through the kitchen, knocking over chairs. The back door was jammed. He slammed his shoulder into it, splintered it open, and didn't stop running until he reached his truck. When he looked back, the house was dark again, still and silent, the way it had been before. They found him the next morning, sitting in his driveway, still in his uniform, clutching the cracked faceplate of the clock. He couldn't explain how he'd gotten it. The lab in Austin called a few days later about the samples. Whatever was inside that clock wasn't mechanical. It was organic tissue, preserved and cold as if frozen solid despite never being stored in refrigeration. They couldn't identify it. The farmhouse was demolished a month later. The land was cleared, the rubble hauled off, and the records sealed. But strange things started happening at the county archive. The photo evidence folder from the case, where every image was corrupted except one. The family portrait. The clock behind them glowed faintly, and the timestamp read 3:17 a.m. A year after the demolition, a developer built a new home on the property. The family that moved in reported their power cutting out at night around the same time, always 3:17. Their wall clock stopped working, their phones reset to the same minute, and their youngest daughter began waking up crying, saying she could hear something ticking inside the walls. When the father checked one night, he found a cold spot above the fireplace and faint fingerprints in the dust, shaped like small hands reaching upward. He wiped them away, but by morning, they were back, pressed against the glass of the new clock his wife had hung. It was frozen at 3:17 a.m. When the county auctioned off the old Wycliffe property, it was little more than a decaying frame on a sagging patch of land about 5 miles east of Palestine, Texas. The house had no power, no plumbing that worked, and no reason for anyone sane to buy it. But in the back of the crowd that August morning, a man in a faded blue cap raised his hand. His name was Aaron Locke, a quiet 30-something who worked odd jobs for the hardware store in town. He said he just wanted some peace. Folks who knew him from the store said he'd been through something, divorce maybe, or a loss. Nobody asked too many questions. People in Anderson County understood that kind of silence. When he moved in, the house was stripped bare except for one thing: a single church pew in the center of the living room. It was angled toward the front window, where the view looked out across the county road that wound through the pines. There were streaks of dried candle wax pooled in the boards beneath it, hardened white drips that had built up in little puddles as if from long nights of burning light. He didn't throw the pew out. He dusted it, set it back straight, and left it exactly where it had been. Within a week, the neighbors noticed he sat there most evenings after sundown, just sitting motionless facing the road. Old Mrs. Horton, who lived across the way, said she'd see the faint glow of a candle through the front window even after midnight. One night she thought she saw him gesturing, lips moving as though he were preaching to someone just beyond the glass. The next morning she mentioned it to the mail carrier, who said he'd seen the same thing on his route. A man on the pew, head bowed, muttering toward the empty road. "He's a preacher without a congregation," the mailman said. "But maybe he's got one we can't see." The history of the Wycliffe house had always been a little grim. Before Aaron, it belonged to Reverend Carl Wycliffe, who'd gone off the deep end sometime around the late 1970s. Folks said he'd started his own ministry after being dismissed from his church for unorthodox sermons. His services were private, held inside his home. People claimed they'd hear chanting from the windows and that sometimes the road out front would fill with figures walking toward the house, silent and slow, vanishing before they reached the door. When the sheriff finally went out there in '81, he found the living room just as it was now. One pew, candles, and a Bible burned down the middle. The Reverend was never found. Only his clothes folded neatly on the porch. Aaron didn't seem the kind to chase ghost stories. At first, he went to work, kept to himself, waved politely. But as fall crept in, he started changing. The grocery clerk noticed he stopped buying food that needed cooking, just candles and instant coffee. The neighbor across the way heard him reciting something late at night, a low rhythmic voice that carried through the open window like a sermon's tail end. When she mentioned it to the sheriff's deputy, he told her not to worry. "He's harmless," he said. "Probably just lonesome." But lonesome men don't draw shapes in candle wax or carve crosses into window frames. By early November, the house had that smell of mildew and burned wax you could catch from the road. Aaron hadn't come into town in weeks. His mailbox was stuffed full. A lineman from the electric company said he'd gone out there to check a downed line and caught sight of something strange. Rows of wax figures on the floor, molded into rough human shapes, lined up facing the window like a congregation. He said Aaron had smiled at him through the glass but didn't move to open the door. Just raised his hand in a slow benediction. The lineman left without knocking again. When Deputy Keene finally did a welfare check, he said it was like stepping into a church that had drowned. The air was heavy, humid, full of that faint candle stink and something else, something coppery. The pew was still there, wax thick beneath it, the front window spotless. The rest of the house was bare except for strange scrawls along the walls. Half-burned passages from Revelation mixed with what looked like handwriting from someone else entirely. Like two people sharing the same journal but never meeting. Aaron wasn't inside. The back door was open to the fields. They found him 3 days later, sitting on a fence post by the road, barefoot and blank-eyed. He said he'd been waiting for the procession. When the deputy asked what he meant, he said, "You can't hear them, can you?" They walk where the light falls. That's why the pew faces the window. He laughed once, short and dry, then went quiet again. They took him to the hospital in Tyler, but he never spoke after that. The house sat empty through winter. Then in March, someone broke in, kids most likely. They said they just wanted to take a look. One of them, a 16-year-old named Jesse, told his girlfriend later that it didn't feel abandoned. The candle wax was fresh, still soft under his shoes. There were footprints in it, bare feet, small, dozens of them leading toward the window. He said he saw movement outside, even though it was only the wind in the trees. He swore he heard a low hum, like many voices whispering at once, rising and falling in rhythm, as if answering someone they couldn't see. When he ran out, he turned back long enough to glimpse the pew. There was someone sitting there again. Not Aaron. Someone older, dressed in a torn black coat, hands folded, watching the road. A week later, the sheriff's office sealed the place off. But nothing stopped the rumors. Truckers passing by late at night said they saw lights inside, like candles burning in a row. A couple from Crockett claimed they saw people walking along the shoulder in the fog. Dozens of them, pale, wet with dew, moving in unison toward the house. When the man slowed his car, his wife said every one of them turned their head at once. Now nobody drives that road after dark. The county posted a barrier last year, citing erosion, but folks know it's not the road they're worried about. The house is still there, half collapsed, but the front window somehow intact. The pew sits in its place, angled just so, facing the county road that cuts through the trees. Sometimes when the wind dies and the moon hits that glass, you can see shadows lined up inside, still and waiting. If you're quiet, you might catch a faint voice, hoarse, patient, like a sermon beginning again after a long silence. They say it's just echoes or trick light, but anyone who's lived here long enough will tell you different. They'll tell you not to stop near that house, not even for a second. Because out there on that stretch east of Palestine, the dead don't rest in cemeteries. They gather where the candles burn, and they still walk the road at night. When the house on the edge of Lake Nasworthy was stripped for renovation, the workers didn't expect to find much. It had been sitting vacant since the mid-'80s, a 2-story farmhouse that had weathered heat and hail and decades of neglect. The realtor said it belonged to some retired music teacher who died without family, and the property had cycled through the county auction list a few times before landing in the hands of a young couple from Austin. They were the ones who sent the crew to gut it, take out the walls, pull up the floors, get it ready for the kind of clean, modern makeover that erased every bit of its history. By the 3rd day, most of the front rooms were stripped bare except for the living room where the old oak floor was warped and cracked from years of humidity. One of the workers, a guy named Jesse, pried up a loose board near the corner by the window. He expected mice or old nails. Instead, there was a thin cardboard sleeve wrapped in wax paper, wedged between the joists like someone had hidden it deliberately. He called over the others, and together they pulled it free. Inside was a vinyl record, dusty but intact, with a handwritten label in neat cursive that read, "For the children." They laughed about it at first, figuring it was some kind of lullaby or school recording, something the old music teacher must have made. The sleeve smelled faintly of mildew and candle wax. Jesse wiped the record with his shirt and carried it out to his truck, where he kept an old portable turntable for listening to country records on lunch breaks. It took a few tries to get the record balanced, and when the needle dropped, the groove made a faint pop before settling into a flat, steady silence. "Guess it's blank," one of the guys said, but they let it spin anyway, watching the black disc turn, the faint hiss of static whispering under the summer air. Jesse turned up the volume, nothing. The record ran for a few minutes, slow and quiet. Then as the needle neared the center, a faint sound broke through. It wasn't music. It wasn't even static. It was a small voice, so faint it almost blended with the hum of the generator nearby. The voice said, "Play it again." They all froze for a second. Jesse laughed and lifted the needle. "Probably some weird loop," he said. He reset it, dropping the needle again at the outer edge. Silence again. The same hiss. They waited, leaning close. When it reached the end this time, the voice came through clearer. "Play it again." Only it didn't sound like the same take. It was higher, shakier, like a different child was saying it. After the third time, Jesse pocketed the record and said he'd take it home to clean it properly. That night, his girlfriend said he came in quiet, smelling like dust and motor oil. He set up the turntable on their kitchen counter, cleaned the record with a soft cloth, and played it once more. He swore later that there was more sound the second time. Beneath the static, he could make out faint notes of a music box tune, uneven, like someone humming along with it off-key. He played it again and the tune grew clearer. The humming turned to singing, a group of small voices, children, chanting a slow, tuneless rhyme that made no sense at all. There were pauses, whispers, something tapping in rhythm with the melody. When it reached the end, the same small voice returned, breathy and urgent. "Play it again." The next day, Jesse didn't show up for work. His boss called and got no answer. By evening, his girlfriend went to his trailer and found the record spinning on the turntable, the needle long since stopped. The player was still on, the motor faintly humming. Jesse was gone. The door was locked from the inside, and there was no sign of struggle, just a faint smell of something metallic and wet. The sheriff's report said it was an unresolved disappearance. No forced entry, no footprints, no vehicle missing. But when they bagged up his belongings, the record was logged as evidence and sent to the lab for analysis. One of the technicians there was a woman named Carla, who'd worked on a dozen strange cases before, mostly domestic stuff. She ran a spectral analysis on the grooves, expecting it to be blank or damaged. Instead, the waveform showed strange patterns, intermittent low-frequency spikes, irregular but rhythmic, almost like breathing. Late that night, curiosity got to her. She stayed in the lab alone and played the record through the monitors. The same silence filled the room, but when the voice came, it was no longer faint. It said, "Ma, play it again." And this time the words came with a soft echo, like they were bouncing off a narrow room. She did as it said. Each time she replayed it, the background noise changed. The faint hum became something like children laughing, then crying, then a thin, distant scream. Carla stopped it, heart pounding, and turned off the lights in the room to calm herself. But in the darkness, she swore she could still hear the faint rhythm of that music box. When she turned the lights back on, the record player was still spinning, though she hadn't touched it. The needle moved by itself, sliding back to the start. Carla quit her job the next morning. The record was placed back into evidence storage, sealed, and marked as contaminated media. Within a week, the evidence room flooded due to a broken pipe. The report said several boxes were damaged beyond recovery. Among them was the record labeled "For the Children." But that wasn't the end of it. Months later, a man named Robert Lane bought the same house near San Angelo at auction. He planned to finish what the previous owner started. He'd heard the stories, even found an old forum post about the haunted record, but dismissed it as nonsense. One evening, while walking across the unfinished living room, he stepped on a soft spot in the floor. When he pried up the board, he found a small space filled with melted candle wax and a faint circle of chalk markings beneath it. He called it weird but not alarming, until he saw something else tucked against the joist. It was another record. The same label. The same handwriting. For the Children. He didn't own a turntable, but curiosity drove him into town to buy one from a pawn shop. He brought it home, set it on a folding table, and placed the record carefully. When the needle touched, the hiss began, low, steady, familiar. Silence stretched. Then faintly, a new sound emerged. It was the voice of a woman, whispering in a soft, shaky tone. She said, "They're still waiting." The air seemed to shift then, the light flickering across the bare studs of the living room. From somewhere beneath the floor, Robert heard a faint scraping noise, like something small shifting in the dirt. He lifted the needle. The noise stopped. He dropped it again. The whisper returned. "Play it again." Neighbors said they saw him that night sitting alone by the open window, the record spinning over and over until dawn. When they checked the next day, the turntable was still going, but Robert was gone. His truck was in the drive, his tools laid out, the power still running. The only thing out of place was the record, cracked clean down the middle, still faintly humming, though the speakers were disconnected. The property has been sold 3 more times since then. Every owner reports strange things. Faint laughter in the vents, the smell of wax and smoke, the sound of old music when the house is quiet. One renter swore she heard a child's voice in the hallway at night whispering the same words, "Play it again." When the county finally condemned the house last year, the demolition crew refused to work after the first day. They said their tools went missing, that they kept finding melted wax circles on the floor each morning. The foreman swore he heard a record playing somewhere even though the power was cut. The next morning, the site was empty. Every piece of wood had been reduced to splinters. The lot is still there, fenced off and grown over, and the locals say you can hear something if you stand by the fence at night, a faint, scratchy hiss under the sound of the wind. And if you listen close enough, just as it fades, a small voice whispers from somewhere below the dirt, soft as breath, patient and waiting. Play it again. The first thing Maribel noticed about the duplex on Craig Street was the smell. It wasn't rot exactly, though there was some of that. Old sheetrock, mildew, maybe something dead behind the walls, but something sharper, like turpentine and sour milk mixed together. The kind of odor that lingered in your nose and made the back of your throat itch. The property manager said the place had been empty for years, one of those forgotten rentals left to soak in Gulf humidity. Maribel didn't mind. She and her husband Luis had been cleaning abandoned homes around Corpus Christi for over a decade, and the worse the condition, the higher the pay. Still, something about this house made her stomach twist the moment they stepped inside. Luis turned on the work light and squinted at the stained ceiling tiles. "We'll start with the living room," he said, his voice muffled behind a mask. "We get this done before dark, yeah?" Maribel nodded and unpacked the vacuum and mop bucket. The manager had warned them about vagrants breaking in, but the doors were all locked tight. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood people wandered for long anyway. They worked in silence for an hour, scraping grime from the kitchen counters, tossing out trash that had fused to the linoleum. Then, somewhere above them, came the first scrape. It was faint at first, like nails dragging over wood. Then a pause. Then again, slower. A rhythmic pattern. Luis straightened, cocking his head. "You hear that?" Maribel stopped mopping. The sound came again, longer this time. Scrape, stop, scrape. "Probably raccoons," she said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Luis grabbed the flashlight from the counter. "Too dry up there for raccoons. Maybe rats." He pulled the step ladder to the hallway ceiling where a square of loose drywall hung slightly open. The air coming through it was cool and dusty, carrying the smell of old insulation. Luis climbed up 2 steps and shined the light into the gap. "Damn," he muttered. "Something's written up here." Maribel frowned. "Written?" "Yeah, on the beam. Hold the ladder steady." He pushed his head and arm up farther. The light beam jittered across cobwebs and splintered wood. Maribel heard him whisper something, then go quiet. "What does it say?" she asked. He lowered himself slowly, eyes wide behind his mask. "It says, 'Don't let them paint over me.'" Carved right into the wood, Maribel felt a cold prickle crawl up her arms. "That's a joke, right?" Luis shook his head. "No joke. Deep cuts too. Looks old." They stared at the ceiling opening. The scratching had stopped. By late afternoon, the place looked marginally better. Though neither of them spoke much after the discovery, Luis kept glancing up, uneasy. The smell hadn't gone away either. It seemed stronger now, almost sweet and rotting at once. When Maribel dumped the last bucket of mop water outside, she swore she heard something whisper from the attic vent above her. Not words, just a sigh. That night, Maribel couldn't shake the image of those carved letters. "Don't let them paint over me." She pictured someone crouched up there in the dark, carving into the beam by flashlight, their hands shaking. She told herself it had to be graffiti, some junkie hiding out years ago. Still, when she dozed off, she dreamt of gray paint dripping from the ceiling, spelling words across her arms. The next morning, they returned with 2 younger helpers, cousins from Robstown who worked part-time. The cousins laughed when Luis told them about the carving. "Probably a ghost contractor," one joked. "Don't want his work covered." But their laughter faded when they too heard the scratching start again. It came from directly above the hallway this time, steady, dragging, deliberate. Guandi, of the cousins, Diego, threw a broom handle up and smacked the drywall. The sound stopped for a few seconds, then started again, louder. Something's up there, Maribel said quietly. Luis fetched the screwdriver and widened the hole. A puff of gray dust fell into his hair. He pushed the flashlight up again. Jesus, he breathed. There's more writing. Maribel climbed halfway up the ladder. From below, she could just make out the words burned into the beam with what looked like a hot nail or wire. They painted over her, it said. She climbed down, heart racing. Luis, we should call the manager, let them check it out. But Luis was stubborn. Probably kids messing around. I'm not letting this job go unfinished. That night, the manager didn't answer. They decided to come back one more day, finish early, and be done. When they arrived the next morning, the smell had changed again. It was heavier, almost human. The cousins didn't show up. Maribel said nothing, only followed Luis through the doorway as the work light flickered on. The scratches began the moment they entered. Rapid, erratic, like something angry being dragged back and forth. Luis froze beneath the sound, gripping the flashlight. It's right above the living room now, he said. Maribel felt a shudder run through her. Then don't open it again. But he already had the ladder under the noise. The scraping intensified, furious now. Dust drifted down in soft gray flakes. He aimed the light and pushed at the loose section of drywall until it cracked open wide enough to look in. The light caught something pale between the beams. Not insulation, not wood. Skin. Luis dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, beams spinning wildly over the walls. What did you see? Maribel gasped. He didn't answer. His face was white, eyes locked on the ceiling hole. There's someone up there, he whispered. Before she could speak, a hand slipped through the gap, gray, shriveled nails long as splinters. It scraped the air once, then retreated. The scratching resumed immediately, louder than ever. They ran out of the house, not bothering to lock the door. Luis didn't speak the whole drive home. Later that evening, the manager called back. He sounded confused when Maribel told him what had happened. That's impossible, he said. That place was gutted last year. We sealed the attic. No way anyone's up there. Maribel hung up, trembling. She looked at Luis, who sat on the edge of the bed, still pale. We're not going back, she said. He nodded, but his eyes were unfocused, like he was listening to something only he could hear. The next morning, he was gone. His truck was parked outside, keys in the ignition. The front door was open. Maribel found muddy footprints leading inside the house, up the hallway, beneath the hole in the ceiling. A ladder leaned there, half unfolded. The ceiling was freshly painted. Thick gray strokes covered the old stains. But just before the paint reached the corner beam, a section had been left bare. Scratched into the wood, still wet with dark paint, were new words. They made me paint over her. By the time police arrived, the attic was empty. They never found Luis, though the responding officer later reported hearing faint scraping above him while filing his report. The sound came and went like breathing. The property was condemned. Soon after, but neighbors still swear on quiet nights they hear something clawing under the roof. A slow rhythmic sound like a brush dragged across a wall. And when the moonlight hits the upper window just right, you can see the faint shimmer of words beneath the layers of paint. Pleading, invisible until the night air turns heavy with the smell of turpentine and old blood. The ambulance lights had long since gone. The yellow tape sagged where the rain had loosened it, and the house on Maple Street looked like every other foreclosure you had ever passed in Denton. Only sadder because it had been someone's life folded into rooms and sold off in a single line item. The porch sagged on one side as if listening. The windows were blind with dirt. When I pushed the front door, the lock gave a little and then the smell hit me. A fat, weird thing that lived between rot and smoke, like old paper gone bad and something sweet put on top of it to hide it. I am not a brave man. I am a man with stale coffee and bills and a curiosity that is mostly habit. But when I saw the oven door half off and the curled, blackened pages shoved inside like someone had tried to feed the fire the last of their life, I thought, this is a story and I will not leave a story lying. You will think that there is a logic to these things. There is sometimes. People set fires to destroy evidence. People hide things inside ovens because ovens are iron boxes attached to the bones of a house. An oven is a mouth and a belly. It keeps secrets the way people who have been married for 30 years keep secrets. But the journal I pulled out was not just burnt. It was baked until the edges were glassy, the ink swollen and fused into the paper like something that did not want to be read, but had to be. I used the sleeve of my jacket to brush ash from the top page, and the letters ran together like dried tears. The last entry stared up at me in a hand that might have been a woman's and might have been shaking. I tried burning her bones, but she keeps coming back through the pipes. That sentence will live in me for a long time. It is the kind of sentence that pries at a hinge, makes the world tremble a little. You read it and you expect a punchline or a medical explanation and you get neither. The house had been empty for months, neighbors said. And before that, someone named Lottie had lived there. Then someone else. Then an old man who kept to himself and fed the neighborhood cats stale bread. The county had put a sign on the tree. The sheriff's deputy who rolled by in his patrol truck shrugged when I called, because there was nothing violent in the obvious way. No bodies, no blood on the street. He said the fire report simply said electrical, and looked at his phone like my story was one more notification to flick past. People are practiced at ignoring the throb in the corner of their day that might be a heart attack and are even better at ignoring a story that smells of trouble. I took the journal to my little apartment and laid it on the kitchen table, as if that might make the question less hungry. The pages were brittle, the spine mostly gone. There were dates, half-formed addresses, small drawings that looked like baby hands and pipes coiling like river maps. There was a name repeated, an anchor I kept finding like a bruise. Marin, Marin this, Marin that. The handwriting made Marin a person you could reach with your thumb. The earlier entries were ordinary. Payments missed, a rooster in the neighbor's yard, a bad landlord. Then the handwriting got cramped and the ink darker and the entries shorter. Once she wrote, I washed 3 shirts in the bathtub with bleach and the water went black. Twice she tried to leave and the truck would not start. Once she wrote she heard the pipes sing at night and thought it was the house settling. That is the kind of entry you skim past until you stop skimming. I found out about Marin from the county clerk. She had been on the records until the name on the deed changed. The clerk frowned at me like I had asked for something embarrassing. Moved away, she said, and that was that. The old man who used to feed the cats had his own answers. He said Marin had been a quiet one, painted little watercolors once, laughed with her eyes until there were no more laughs left. People leave things behind, he said, which is true in a way that is not comforting. People leave dishwashers, they leave photographs, they leave porch swings with splinters. They do not always leave the things that come home through the pipes. I did the sensible things in order to be less ridiculous. I checked the public records. I called the utility company. I crawled under the house because the journal kept insisting with its little drawings that the pipes were important. Under a house in Denton is a world of its own. Plywood panels that smell like mold. Copper lines like small rivers, a tangle of animal nests. The occasional dead raccoon folded in the same way a shirt folds in a drawer. I had a flashlight and a cheap respirator. The crawl space was low and the air tasted of old sweat. I pushed my arm under and my fingers brushed a rusted length of pipe that had a fine hairline of something on it. A black residue that when I cleaned it with my sleeve came away like soot, but stuck to my skin like regret. The sound started at night, soft as a throat clearing and then like a woman humming off key. You will think that the brain supplies song where none exists because it wants sense. I wanted sense so badly I made a list of logical possibilities. Rodents in the ducts. A neighbor's late-night radio. The pipes working. Maybe the house had an old radio wired into the ductwork. Maybe Marin had some peculiarity. I taped pieces of paper over the vents and listened. The humming came louder sometimes. Not through the vents, but through the sink. Through the radiator valves. As if the house had been hollowed and someone had put a mouth on every tube. There is a part of any sensible man that will tell you to stop. I have that part. It gets quieter the longer you listen. I slept poorly. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth and the journal face down on the table, because the cat had pushed it and I had let it stay. The entries, when I read them by daylight, were less dramatic than you imagine. They were obsessive. They circled. One entry said the water tasted of pennies. Another said she found small bones in the trap under the sink and wrapped them and buried them in the jar under the house. That sentence reads less awful than it felt. Bones can mean a lot of things. A bird's sternum, the kind of brittle thing a rat leaves. But then the handwriting turned certain and small and the letters clenched like fingers. She keeps coming back through the pipes, Marin wrote, as if to remind herself that she had said it and it had not gone away. You will demand evidence and I will give you what I had. One rainy Tuesday, I ran a camera down the plumbing. You can buy a cheap sewer camera online that makes you feel like an expert because it shows everything in a bubbly, glossy way on a phone screen. The camera went through elbows and couplings in black slime, and at one point the feed went gray because the lens fogged. Then the image cleared, and there, pressed to the inside of the pipe, as if it had been staring outward for a long time, was a shape no sewer camera expects to find, a small, pale thing with hair that looked like the frayed fibers of an old mop, wet and clinging. It had a face in the crude sense that two darker holes sat where eyes might be and a suggestion of a nose. It did not move like flesh moves. It shifted like a leaf does when someone breathes. The image flickered and the camera glitched, and the shape receded as if pulled backward by something colder than suction. I did not show the footage to many people, because one does not hand a glowing phone to a neighbor and say, "Watch this and tell me if this is normal." I showed it to the deputy. He watched the playback with his jaw loose. He shrugged the way men with badges do when they want to hand the problem to a different department. "Call animal control," he said. Animal control came with a van and a man with a kindly hat. He watched a clip and said, "This looks like a raccoon pup with mange." That would have been a relief if the clip had been a raccoon. The face, the way the hair stuck in ropes, the way the thing seemed intent on the lens, none of that matched the tape. I remember standing there while the man in the hat tapped his clipboard like it would add weight to his words. He said he could not go under the house because the landowner would need to sign a release, and the landowner was not answering. Everything slid back into a waiting pattern like traffic at a light that never changes. Sleep left me. The house on Maple Street was always a half-mile away in my mind. I would wake at 3 in the morning with the sound of pipes singing as if someone were plucking a string. I started to smell things again, that old paper smell and something sweet and mineral under it. At the sink when I turned the tap, the water tasted like pennies and lullabies. I confessed to a woman I was seeing that I had found the journal. I thought confessing would be a light, an honesty that would cut the teeth out of fear. She listened and her mouth tightened with a kindness that was almost pity, and she said, "You need to let the dead be dead." I remember thinking how ridiculous that sounded, like telling a dog that the bone was not worth digging for. The journal kept taking steps toward a story that would not have a sensible ending. There were pages with practical things, lists of names of plumbers, numbers of churches, times at which the humming got worse. There were sketches of the drain layout with little arrows and one page with a map of the house interior, where someone had written in block letters the word answer and circled the basement drain. I followed that map. I went into the crawl space again when the moon was a cracked coin. Under the house the air was colder and the pipes were slick. I took a little lamp and a rope and I jimmied up the access trap like a man who had been making small compromises for a long time, and finally authorized a big one. I found jars. They were the kind of mason jars you might keep for tomatoes and preserves, except they were not dusty like the rest of the house. They sat on a shelf nailed to a beam, lined up like soldiers. Inside each jar was a tightly wrapped bundle of cloth and bones, if you want me to say bones. I will say them because the word matters less than the thing itself, which was small, animal and inexplicably human in the way small things can be. A finger bone maybe, someone's canine separated by a bite. Names were on the lids in faded ink. Marin had written dates in short sentences, a calendar of small failures and a record. I tried burning her bones, but she keeps coming back through the pipes. Underneath, in a different hand, a smudged word, forgive. The jars smelled of vinegar and rain and something older. I will not pretend I handled this with courage. I sat on a beam and I wept because the house had become a ledger of a woman's attempts to understand something that had overwhelmed her. I thought of fire, which is tidy and final and honest. I thought that maybe Marin had been right in a way that modern minds cannot measure. The final entry read like a confession and a command at the same time. It said that she had boiled the bones and thrown ash down the drain. It said she had watched small things crawl away and thought the problem solved. The last line was the one in the oven, the one that had eaten me. I tried burning her bones, but she keeps coming back through the pipes. I tried to rationalize it as a grief story. People speak of their dead, and the dead return in habits and odors and echoes. You can smell a lover on the pillow and mistake it for presence. Grief is a pipe that leads to a river that floods your floors. But one night, as water ran and I leaned over the sink in my little place and watched the reflection tremble, I heard a tiny knock from the drain. It was a polite thing, a tentative rap like knuckles at a neighbor's door. I froze and then lifted the plug and nothing came out because the sink was dry. But the knocking went on, soft and patient as if someone wanted you to know they were there and would wait until you were polite enough to answer. Set the jars back under the house and nailed the access panel. Closed because the cost of what I had opened felt like it could bleed into everything else. People bury things because they hope to unburden themselves. Marin had buried what she could in those jars. If you are asking me whether I performed some ritual to stop the thing, whether I took a lighter and set the jars on fire or called the priest or burned salt, I will tell you I did none of those heroic things. I put the papers and the drawings in a box and I drove that box out past the county line and I left it under a willow tree. That is cowardice dressed as prudence. When I think of Marin now, I think less of a haunting and more of a habit that learned how to survive. Pipes are not walls and they are not bones, but they are corridors where small secret things can move. The next spring, I drove by the house on Maple Street and saw new people hauling things in, laughing with the desperate cheer of people who refuse to be sad. The oven had been replaced. A tiny plant in a blue pot sat on the windowsill and the yellow tape was gone. I felt the urge to go to the front door and knock and say, "You should know about the pipes. You should check the trap." But I did not. I drove away and thought of the journal laying under the willow in the jars under the house and the polite knock in the drain, and I understood that some houses collect certain kinds of sorrow and hold them like treasures. Sometimes at night, when the rain comes and the gutters sing and the city lights smear like oil on the horizon, I hear the pipes in my building settle. They make little conversational sounds and sometimes a pattern forms in those sounds, and I imagine a tiny face pressed to the inside of the copper, watching, waiting to be let out. I think of Marin in her kitchen trying to burn what she thought needed burning and failing, because this is not the kind of thing flames understand. Fire is a blunt instrument. The thing that came back through the pipes wanted a place to be remembered, a way to move where people would notice. It learned the plumbing and it learned the language of sinks and of hissed steam. It learned that pipes carry more than water. They carry memory. If you want finality, I will give you a line that is not satisfying and yet honest. I drove back one night a year after I found the journal and dug under the ivy at the base of the willow where the box had been. The box was gone. In its place, there was a circle of sod that had been recently disturbed and the faint scent of vinegar and rain. The pipes in my apartment hummed when I turned on the tap, and for a moment I thought I heard a small knock from the drain, polite as ever. I answered with nothing but the sound of my own hand slapping the counter, because what else do you say to a thing that learned a route into the house and remembers how you once tried to make it go away by feeding it to the fire? I took the job because it was out on a quiet stretch between Waco and West, where the FM roads lift and fall like the back of some sleeping animal. The place had been a foreclosure, one of those low single-story ranch houses thrown up in the 70s, brown brick and square windows, and a carport sagging like a lip. The bank wanted a quick cleanup before listing, which meant me and my cousin's trailer and a day of scraping up old carpet tack strips. The first thing I noticed when I keyed in was the smell. It was not rot. It was not sewage. It was something colder than that, like the air right before a thunderstorm when you feel the weight of water crowding out the heat. The thermostat was dead, and the electricity had been cut for months, but the hall that led to the master bedroom felt air-conditioned. The hairs on my arms lifted like the room had moved past me. I found the bathroom by the dull coin of daylight that had squeezed through the clouded window. The tub was porcelain with a yellowed rim, the kind people like to call clawfoot, even though it sat built-in beneath tile the color of old mint. The water inside was black, not dirty, not muddy, black. It had a surface that didn't take light, like motor oil that forgot how to shine. I saw my own outline in it, but it wasn't a reflection so much as a shadow that leaned back at me. Floating dead center was a wooden cross, the kind you'd expect to see hanging over a farmhouse door, a simple 2x set into a T and sanded until someone's hands took up permanent residence in the grain. Around its edges were ragged grooves. When I leaned close, the grooves bit light and showed pale flecks. They looked like slivers of dry cedar. Then I saw they were bone, not whole chips, not clean. Splinters like something had raked the edges until its nails gave up, and the fingers underneath took the punishment. Someone had held on hard. Someone hadn't wanted to slip. Water should have skinned over with dust after all that time. It should have dropped to a ring. I don't know why, but I reached out and pinched the cross at the top, and it turned under my pinch as if pinned in place by a magnet below. The black water didn't lap. It didn't do anything except adjust to make room for my fingers. The wood felt colder than the room. I pulled my hand back and wiped it on my jeans, though there'd been nothing to wipe off. If you've ever been in a church alone, you know there is a sound that has nothing to do with sound. A long breath the building takes whether anyone sits in the pews or not. That bathroom had it. I backed out, thinking I'd leave the bathroom for last. The neighbor was a man with soft shoulders who lived 2 houses down where the road meets the fence line, and a swing gate rusts into permanent apology. He walked over after he saw my truck and said the county clerk might still have a key to the well house, like the house itself had a body part in custody. His name was Randall, and he taught history at the high school, and was one of those men who look like they have been perpetually in their 40s since they were 20. He tried to angle his head into the cooler air of the doorway, and I told him the power was off. He nodded and said, "When you get to the bathroom, leave it open." He watched my face while he said it. Then he added that the woman who lived here last did Bible study in the master. The church was small and gave her a pass to do it at home since her husband didn't like crowds. A couple families would come once a week and sometimes twice. I said I was only cleaning. He said I'm only telling. He flagged a fly from his cheek and looked down the road toward a blue patch of sky the clouds had not yet stolen, and told me he could remember the smell of river catfish, even with the wind wrong. Inside, the house had settled in a way you can't see until you move through it. Door frames had a lean. Nail pops dotted the ceiling. Above the mantel, the outline of a cross remained in a square of brighter wall where someone had spared it from sun fading. In the kitchen, I found a coffee can filled with screws and rubber bands turned amber and brittle. There was a child's crayon under the edge of the baseboard near the pantry. No toys, no photos. No framed diplomas. No indications of a life beyond what had once been clung to and then carried away. The one place that refused to be neutral was the bathroom. The black water gave the air its impossible chill and a tiny pressure in my ear like a plane landing. I propped the door fully open with a bucket so the hinges wouldn't swing it shut behind me. There are simple tests you run because you are human, and your mind wants rules. I fetched a mop handle and laid it across the surface. It didn't float. It sank like the water wanted it. I jerked the handle back and stared at it and found it dry. Not a bead. Not a dampness. I took a coin out of my pocket and dropped it dead center. Nothing disturbed. There was no circle expanding, no ripple walking the sides. The coin did not flash or turn. It disappeared as if I had pressed it into tar. I stuck my hand out to feel for temperature and went rigid when the surface cooled my skin without touching it. I had to think about my breathing. I backed out until the tile stopped, then until the hallway carpet took my weight. At lunch, I sat on the porch step and ate a turkey sandwich warm from the cooler. The insects burned in the grass and the sky worked its blue deeper. A pickup slid past toward the cattle guard at the end of the road, and the driver lifted one finger from the steering wheel in that small country salute you have to earn by being a part of the landscape. When I finished eating, I had to go back in because I had taken a job and because the tub had suggested a dare that did not include my permission. I could skip rooms, but I could not skip the house. I think of this a lot now. How a house can make you feel like you have been volunteered. I was in there with a hammer, pulling baseboard nails near the linen closet when the cross tapped the side of the tub. The tap traveled through the wall into my wrist bones. It was a gentle thing. A ping like glass cooled and remembered its shape. I told myself I had knocked something. Then it tapped again, and the sound settled in the tile at my feet and sailed up my legs to where I couldn't help but swallow. I stood and looked. The cross had rotated a quarter turn. I hadn't left any window open. The air was still and heavy. The surface of the water had not moved at all. The cross tapped the porcelain again. A sound I could now anticipate the way a man who lives near train tracks can predict the tremor of a passing freight. It turned in tiny degrees until the long arm pointed toward me in the doorway. You will think I am dressing this up. You will think I am making poetry out of nerves. I swear to you that when it pointed my way, every tendon in my hand pulled my fingers shorter. It was not a threat in the way that a blade is a threat. It was an offering. I understood that whoever had set it floating had done so because they needed to hold on to something. I understood that the wood wasn't there to be holy. It was there to keep a body from being taken. I drove to the hardware store in Belmead and bought a sump pump because problem-solving demands tools. I could set it on the lip, run a hose out the window and send whatever the bank and physics refused to explain into the drainage ditch. When I got back, the clouds had the look of cooked fat. It felt later than it was. I hauled the pump inside and set it on the edge of the tub and fed the hose through the window screen I slit with my pocket knife. When I lowered the intake end toward the water, it balked. The pumps I use are thoughtless things. This one found a mind. It stuttered and shook like a dog warning off someone who had come too close to a bowl. Then it knuckled itself off its suction feet and hopped twice until it reached dry tile, and sat there with its little plastic mouth facing away from the tub as if it had the good sense to be ashamed. I turned it off. I slid it back into the hallway and listened as the house made the slow ticks old houses make after you stop doing violence to them. I called Randall because I wanted to say something ordinary and hear something ordinary back. He answered, and I told him the water in the tub was wrong. He was quiet long enough that I didn't think the reception had cut. He asked if the cross had moved. I said yes. He said leave it pointed where it points. He told me a story about the man who used to live there. The man's name was Luther, and he worked nights at a mill down toward Lorena and used to drink coffee on the carport at 3 a.m. while the world behaved itself in the dark. He wouldn't go into town for church services. The little church sent its pastor to him on Thursdays to talk and pray. One August, when the drought made the dust stand on the wind like smoke, a boy from the church sneaked into the house during Bible study and convinced the woman to demonstrate a baptism in the tub while the air conditioning hummed and cicadas made their long one-note music outside. Nothing bad happened to the boy or the woman. Nobody died. There is no clean hook to hang that story on except that a lot of the older folks stopped coming after. It wasn't right, they said, using a bath for that. It wasn't right to make holy what belonged to a body and soap. A month later, the air conditioner stopped working, and Luther started sleeping in the master because the bedroom stayed cool, no matter how the sun laid its iron on the roof. He would shut the bathroom door when he went to bed. He began waking up with his sheets damp as a fever and the tub water higher. Once he tried to sleep with the door open and his wife woke him as he reached the bathroom threshold on his knees, crawling with his palms out like a man praying backward. He began to leave the cross floating there and hold it for a minute before lights out. The grooves appeared slowly. Randall told me this as if he had practiced not dramatizing it. He paused a couple times and I could hear chalk on a board which made no sense but seemed right. He said that after Luther died of something not named by anyone, his wife held on for a while and then disappeared into daughters and Sunday lunches. The church took what furniture she didn't want and an old woman took the pew. The tub remained. The realtors brought in air fresheners and the little plug-in kind with blue lights, and the house went on the market. And when a young couple turned up the next spring and asked about closing dates, the husband took a look at the tub and said the water smelled like pennies and stood for a long time with his hand hovering above the cross like a compass needle, unsure which idea of true to trust. They withdrew their offer 2 days later. Several more turned up and fled. The bank took the listing down and hired me because most men with trailers and tools do not go into master bathrooms with their baseball caps off. He told me one more thing before he hung up. He said that one night last fall he had brought a ladle down to the house because if he could just sample the water and have it tested, he could prove it was only something metallic from the well. He set the ladle on the tile, and the cross turned toward his hand, and he decided that the world had in it things no test would accept. He backed out and shut the door and did not tell his wife or his doctor. He told me this, and then he said he was sorry to deliver a story that didn't solve anything, and then he hung up like he had done something unneighborly. There are men who will leave a thing alone. I am not that man. When something points at me as if to ask me to finish what someone else could not endure, I step forward. I brought a towel from the truck, the one I roll under my neck when I crawl under sinks. I washed my hands in the kitchen because they felt dishonest. Then I stood at the tub and studied the cross like it was a piece of equipment I'd have to take apart and reassemble by memory. The grooves were deep. Some had a slight polish, as if skin had smoothed what started as jagged. The bone splinters were embedded in the fibers of the wood like seeds caught in fence wire. I kept waiting to hear some other sound from the house. A bird in the eaves. A pickup on the road. The tick of a cooling pipe. The air had that heavy pre-storm quality again. The one that makes a person in Central Texas look up and consider how close the hailstones will be to golf balls. The cross tapped once more, a delicate announcement like a spoon on a bell. Then it aimed at my right wrist with the absolute boredom of a needle doing its daily work. I took hold of it. When I did, cold hit my palm and went up my forearm like a sleeve. There was no pain. There was only a subtraction of temperature and a weightless sensation that made my bones feel newly hollow. I think I smiled because the human body is a treacherous interpreter and will sometimes mistake horror for a joke delivered at the perfect time. I tightened my fingers and the grooves accepted them. When I lifted the cross, it resisted like a magnet kisses a refrigerator before it lets go. The surface tension, if you can call it that, did something I don't have the right word for. It clung without wetness. It made my fingerprints feel diagrammed. I drew the cross up and out, and the water rose with it like a black membrane reluctant to part from its ceiling. It came up in a narrow throat and then snapped back with a single gulp. And the sound that gulp made went through the tile, through the studs, through the slab, into soil that had been held for a long time against any honest intrusion. I stumbled back, and the cross was in my hands, and it was just wood. It was just wood with wounds. I stood with it, and the room lost its chill, and I knew I had done something that could not be undone. You would think the water would react. You would think it would claim the tub sides or crawl the walls or show me some signature thought. It did nothing except be black, but it had lost its invisible appetite. The pressure in my ear released. I braced the cross under my arm like a post-hole digger and backed into the hall and set it carefully on the bedroom carpet. I stood there with my hands taking inventory of themselves. I had a ghost feeling on my skin where the cold had been, the opposite of a sunburn, like some private night had left its mark. I decided to finish up other rooms and leave the tub as a problem for an hour from now me. I pulled pantry shelves. I swept. I loaded debris onto the trailer until the wheel well showed a proper fatigue. When I came back for my toolbox, I caught a smell that did not belong. Some people cannot smell rain coming. I can. It has an iron note, not sharp, not bright. The coin smell of clouds mixing with the dust's history. It had moved into the house. I walked to the master bath. The tub was full, but the surface had changed. It was no longer a perfect dark. The black had thinned to show a suggestion of white at the bottom, like chalk seen through tinted glass. In the water, I saw a smear that looked like a handprint, and then became light from the window as the clouds shifted. The cross lay on the carpet where I had put it. That part struck me harder than the water. If this were a story designed to comfort the mind, the cross would have moved on its own. It had not. It had stayed where I left it like a burden that wanted me to participate. I took it to the truck and laid it in the bed. And as I did, I noticed something I had not seen in the dim hallway light. On the long arm, down at the base where some rough carpenter had cut and corrected himself and cut again, someone had burned a shallow line of letters. It took a turn of the wood before the words found their focus. On the left, S; on the right, T; on the long arm, a run of cramped initials, neat and evenly spaced. I traced two without meaning to, and they fit into my forefinger like grooves intended for me. They were not a prayer. They were a register. Every initial ended with a dash and a small mark like a tally. Some had 2, one had 4. I did not want to understand what those meant. I wrapped the cross in an old blanket because a part of me wanted to make it comfortable. It rained while I ate a second sandwich and watched the road become a single ribbon of silver. Out here, the sky can open like someone cut a tarp. The ditches bloomed. The pecans sifted the water through their leaves and shook it off in sheets. I sat there in the fogged cab with the fan on and felt how quickly a house can go from possible to unapproachable. When the rain let up, I went back in because I could not stand to leave a tub full of whatever it was, sitting alone in a structure that wanted me to witness it. The water had risen. That should be impossible in a house closed against the sky. It had risen to the lip, a clean line that made the porcelain look whiter than it was. A single drop had escaped and was working its cool way down the face of the tub to the floor. And I stared at that drop like people stare at newborns, unable to believe the planet can swing and still make room for the small private work of your life. I touched it with my knuckle and it didn't spread. It absorbed into my skin in a precise circle like I had pressed it to a stamp pad. I don't know when I started talking. I said I respected it. I said I would help. I said I understood that someone had needed it the way a drowning man needs a rope laid over a drowning river. I told it because I needed to believe I was dealing with a need and not a want. Then I did the thing every fool in a story does. I put the cross back in. It did not fall like wood. It did not float like wood. It took its old place as if a hand under the water had caught it and agreed to hold it for me. Under the surface, the cross turned toward my hand again, the way a dog's eyes will follow the person who feeds it. The grooves received my grip and the cold came on like a coat put over my shoulders by someone who stands too close in your kitchen. I held it until my knuckles were the color of candles. I let go and the cross stayed put. When I pulled my hand up through the air, my palm felt wet and then showed nothing. My fingerprints looked too clean, as if they'd been filed smooth. The water, sated or reset, lost its edge. The house took a breath and exhaled warm. The smell went from iron to the faintest sweetness, like a shirt that is hung too close to cedar. For the first time since I walked in, I could hear the insects through the window and the whine of a distant engine. Ordinary noises assembled their committee. I did not sleep that night. You cannot sleep after you have given your hand to a thing and felt it not forget you. I lay on my couch at home in North Waco and thought about the initials on the cross and how many marks a person can make before they leave none worth counting. Around 3, I went out into my yard and stood with the grass wet at my ankles, and the sky had that blade edge under the clouds that makes you feel like you live under something that has coils and joints. When I came back and my phone lit up and I had a text from a number I didn't know. The message said, "Do you still have it?" I wrote back, "Who is this?" The reply came like it had been waiting behind a thin door. "Randall, I need to ask if you put it back." I told him I did. He wrote good, then nothing for a long minute, then, "Don't go alone tomorrow." I did not write back because telling a person, "You are stubborn and will ignore them," never changes the truth of it. I arrived at the house early and the light off the wet asphalt made the road look like a river had negotiated a new bed overnight. The house had a smell like laundry air left after the last load. I opened the bathroom door and for a second believed I had been delivered a miracle of banality. The water was gone. The tub was empty. It was not dry. It had a single ring as if a proper evaporation had happened over a proper span of days. The cross lay flat with its top arm resting against the side like a hand spent after holding a rope. I walked to it the way you approach a dog that may bite because you may deserve it. I touched the wood and it was not cold. It felt like wood that had been worn smooth by 1,000 absent-minded fingers on a pew. I stood up and laughed like you laugh when a tire holds air after you believed you heard the hiss. I turned to fetch my pump and a bag to haul the cross out and tell myself it was sentimental salvage. Then the faucet turned itself a quarter turn and released a stream as black as midnight with no cars. It hit the tub without sound. It hit and spread and filled the space it had been meant to fill, and made no attempt at dignity. It rose and then checked itself at the lip. The cross uttered a tap even though I had not moved it. The sound had a sweetness like a chime. The water didn't take steam. The air cooled in increments that found my lungs and made them small. I put my hand on the cross and the cold returned and ran up my arm clean. I gripped until the grooves answered. The bones of my hand reported themselves upward to my elbow. I told myself a useful lie. I told myself I would hold and count to 60 and then let go. I began counting like a man pulled into a river counts to prove the shore is not so far. At 34, the water pulled. It did not tug my hand under, it asked. It asked the way a deep bed asks you to sink. I felt my forearm lengthen in a way that was not physical. I felt for a bright, panicked second how mistakes become vows because your body has already decided they have value. I looked at my changing hand and saw not my fingers but the grooves. My name fell into my mind as initials, a place to cut, a ledger to keep. There is a church off a farm road east of town that I used to drive past when I was still with my wife. It is a small white thing with a sharp steeple and a sign that says all are welcome in block letters that look like they were made with a level. I thought about that church while I stood there. I thought about a woman who had tried to make a home into a sanctuary because a man she loved would not go to a building made for it. I thought about how the human need to be washed clean will take the shape of whatever bowl you place beneath it. I thought about how the cross was not a holy thing. It was a handle for a kind of current that had learned the shape of us. I realized then that all the initials were not a record of survival. They were something like the lines prisoners carve into concrete, a day, a night, a holding, a confession nobody hears unless they put their hand in the same machine. The long arm of the cross had room for more. I let go because I'm not brave and because I am. I let go because I did not want to be accounted for by anything that needed me without loving me. When I pulled my hand away, something came with it that I could not see. It wasn't wetness. It was a pattern. My skin, the part that meets the world and tells me I am me. Had the feeling of something pressed into it too long. When I made a fist, the skin made a sound against itself. The soft rasp a leather glove makes after a long winter. I walked outside with my hand half open like I was balancing a glass egg in my palm. I stood by the trailer and the wind had woken up and the clouds had arranged themselves into an idea they were going to pursue. I heard Randall before I saw him because his shoes slapped the wet like a child's. He had not dressed for rain. His hair lay flat where he had run a hand over it too many times. He looked at my hand and didn't ask. He said, "We can take it to the church." I asked which one. He said any of them, then laughed as if he had heard the idiocy. He said the little one on Old Dallas Road. The pastor is new and thinks the devil lives in music. This will give him something else to worry about. We lifted the cross together and put it in his truck bed and tied it with a strap. The blanket slipped a little and showed the letters. Randall put his fingers there and left them as if to keep the wind from reading it. We drove in a slow, ridiculous procession. 2 men with a piece of wood who could not say if they were rescuer or pallbearer. The church had a tin roof that pinged in the sun. The doors were unlocked because this is Texas and some laws out here are older than most people. Inside it smelled of lemon oil and old paper. We carried the cross to the front and set it across 2 chairs like a body. I realized I had come to a place built for leaving things. I had come to a place that had plumbing and floors that could be mopped and a room where people had learned to hold their tears until the final hymn. The pastor came in from the office with a pen still in his hand. He was younger than me and wore a tie like it had been issued. We told him the story in pieces and he did what men like him do. He looked for a verse to make the world tolerable. He started to say something about casting burdens and I shook my head with a kind of kindness I didn't know I had, and I told him I did not need burdens cast. I needed to be told if someone else had seen water act like a promise. He went quiet. He asked if we were asking for a prayer or a disposal. I said we were asking him to keep a thing where people were used to handling the idea of surrender. He said he didn't know if that was wise. I said I knew. I said I didn't care about Wise. Wise had a different appointment that day. He took it. He let us leave it in a side room under a framed schedule for potlucks. He put a cloth over it from the communion table because he believed in dignity as a blanket that could cover anything. He said he would call some people who understood symbols. I didn't say that this thing was not a symbol. On the way back, Randall drove with both hands locked at 10 and 2, and he kept glancing at his palm as if words would appear there. He asked if the tub would be empty now. I said I didn't know. We did not stop for coffee. We went back to the house and walked down the hall like men walking into a room where they left a sick dog. The tub held water to the lip. It had kept its appointment with itself. The cross was gone and it did not matter. I cleaned that house with a focus I normally reserve for trying to fix something my father would have said cannot be made right. I took every tack strip out without staining the slab. I vacuumed the duct vents. I scraped the kitchen grout until the spoon could see itself in the line. At the end of the day, the bathroom waited with the polite hunger of a thing that knows it can wait. I shut the door and wedged a 5-gallon bucket against it even though I knew it would not keep anything in or out that had already chosen the opposite. At night, I dreamed in ordinary shapes for a while, and then the dream became a bathtub. That was a stock tank that was the Brazos widening without banks, and I was holding a 2x with letters still warm from the iron that burned them. And my hand wasn't wet but was no longer mine, and somewhere a church bell counted to a number I had never reached. I woke to my phone. The pastor had texted, "You need to come back." He sent an image after, a small one that on my screen became a mosaic of squares. I could make out the cloth on the communion table, the white with grapevine embroidery around the edges. I could make out the cross on top of it. I could make out his hand on the long arm where the initials ended and room remained. He had pressed his palm to it, and when he lifted it, he had left no print. He had left a dryness like a shadow. The message said, "It is not heavier than it should be. It is not anything more than wood. But I can hear water behind the walls." We went at dawn. The church was cold the way big rooms get cold even in summer when the light is not yet sure of itself. He took us to the side room. The cross lay there like we had left it. He knocked on the wall gently with his knuckles, and the wall replied with a sound like water draining from a far sink. He said it had done that all night. He had slept in his office and woken every hour. He had prayed until he felt like he was saying words to keep from hearing something smarter than him. He asked what we wanted to do. I began to laugh because the question was an insult the world kept asking. What did I want to do? I wanted to go back to a morning before I knew I could hold a thing and be held back by it. I wanted to sell the house. I wanted to free a woman who had turned a bath into a river. I wanted to cut the cross into 1,000 pieces and see if the black water would hunt each one down. I wanted a simple job hauling carpet in a county where every fence means what it says. I said we should put it back. The pastor looked relieved in a way that made me angry and kinder at once. We carried it to the truck and the far wall gave one more small drain sound like the building had swallowed what it could. We returned to the house in a column, me and a man who taught other people's children what happened before they were born, and a man who told people they had someone listening. We set the cross beside the tub. The water had not changed. I set my hand on the wood and felt the cold sitting in it like an animal that had marked a burrow. I lifted the cross and the water formed its throat and took the tip and drank it down to its old line, with a sound that this time I did not allow into the foundation. I held it for a count without counting. I pressed my palm into the grooves until the wood made a negative of me. I lowered my head because men lower their heads when a thing bigger than them asks without raising its voice. Then I let it go. It floated as if a hand underneath had resumed work it never stopped doing. We backed out. I shut the door. I did not wedge the bucket because theater had become insult. The bank listed the house 3 weeks later. The listing photos were bright and honest. The bathroom door stayed closed in every one. The realtor wrote that the master suite stayed cool year-round, which in this part of Texas sells as well as granite. The neighbor waved when strangers drove in to look. One couple stood in the hall and looked at the bathroom door, and the woman asked if there was a leak because the air had a smell like rain on hot road. The man said he couldn't smell anything and tugged the knob and it turned, and the woman said not to. They left without opening it. A man from out of state put in a cash offer and then backed out on the inspection after finding nothing wrong that money and a Thursday couldn't fix. The house waited. It will be there after you read this. It will wait while the mesquite stacks its shade in the yard and the pecans drop their green grenades, and the ditch along the road knits itself with Johnson grass and paper cups. It will not move. It does not need to. The cross will float and the grooves will not heal, and the initials will remain a run of letters that ask a question men rarely answer honestly. My hand is fine. It is fine the way an old scar becomes the place you touch when you want to remember the story you tell to keep from telling the other one. In the mornings, I sometimes wake with my fist closed like a man holding something heavy, and I take a breath and open it, and a cool little puff of air leaves my palm like a house exhaling. When a storm rolls in and the first smell of iron comes up from the road, I have a moment where my tongue feels like I put a copper penny under it when I was a boy. I have begun to avoid the church near Old Dallas Road because I do not need to learn what the walls have to say to a man who has taught them to behave. Randall and I don't talk about it. Not because we decided to be quiet, because some things decide themselves and then leave you to live inside their decisions with dignity. I sometimes dream a different ending. I dream that I took the cross to the Brazos and threw it in, and the black met the brown, and the river shrugged and accepted one more lie it could carry to the Gulf. I dreamed that the water in the tub had been a kind of patience that could be spent with help, and that I have that help to give. Then I wake and my hand is cold and the air in the room has settled against my face like a damp cloth someone has pressed to check a fever. I lie there and count without numbers and tell myself a harder truth. There are places where the world has found an angle into us, and we make shapes to hold on to because we think we are making a grip. The tub uses a cross not because it needs the story attached, but because it needs our hands. It needs what is left after nails are gone. It needs bone that will give and give and give until splinters become part of something meant for better wood. If you go out that way and the realtor lets you in and you are the kind of person who peeks around corners meant to remain unlooked, you will find the master in the hall cooler than the kitchen. You will open the bathroom door because there is a thing in you that has not yet learned the mercy of leaving closed what people have closed. You will think the water is a trick of light. You will see the cross and think how quaint, how dramatic, how overdone. You might even laugh. Then it will tap. It will not be loud. It will be the kind of sound you can ignore without trying, a signal that knows where to rest in the ear. You will step forward. You will see the grooves. You will tell yourself stories about feral cats and kids with pocket knives and people who should have known better. You will reach out because that is what fingers want from us. You will feel a cold that is not weather. You will consider the good you have done and the bad, and weigh them on a scale kept by a thing that does not know the words for either, and does not care. And if you are very lucky, you will pull your hand back and leave. You will leave it there to wait for someone more pious or more broken or just tired. You will carry the ghost of the grip with you the way I carry mine. And you will come to understand what I have learned in a place where the wind can smell like metal, and mercy in a single breath. We make crosses because we need something to hold when the water calls us by our smaller names. This one learned back. The tub holds what air cannot evaporate. The water never tires. The cross is not a warning. It is a promise that belongs to the bathtub, not to us. If this does not comfort you, good. Some things are not built to comfort. Some things are built to be held until we understand what it is that will not let go. I first heard the humming from the shoulder of Highway 281, in that quiet between Marble Falls and Burnett, where the granite begins rising out of the soil like old bones. The hill country light was falling into that copper color that makes the mesquite and cedar look like they were painted with oil. It was late September, the air still warm but thinner at dusk with the last cicadas thinning out into clicks. I had pulled over because the map said a county road cut toward an old homestead that a fisherman at Lake LBJ told me about. He said the house had collapsed years back. He said the place sang at dusk. People tell you things like that because they want to see whether you will roll your eyes or lean in. I had leaned in. I run a channel that pokes around places everyone forgot, but still talk about. It pays my rent when the algorithm feels generous. Mostly it gives me long drives and an excuse to listen to the different ways Texas can be quiet. I parked off the gravel, killed the engine, and sat with the tick of cooling metal and the smell of cedar. Then I heard it, a low thread of sound like a man trying not to cry. The road continued as a limestone rut through broomweed and sunflower stalks until it met a fence line that had given up on keeping anything out. The posts leaned like drinkers. The barbed wire sagged and glittered as the last light hit it. Beyond the fence, in a shallow bowl of land, lay the house. It had fallen in on itself the way a chest caves when someone exhales and never breathes in again. The roof had crumpled and slid. 2 walls were a suggestion of planes. The front door was missing, only the faint rectangle of lighter wood where hinges had rubbed, and the ghost of a threshold with nails dark as ticks along the edges. I stood with my pack and listened. The hum rose and fell with no real tune, like a string drawn by a hand that was tired. I thought of a man alone on a long porch humming a hymn not to praise but to keep his throat from closing. My phone picked it up well enough. The app's waveform crawled little hills and valleys of sound. I kicked through broomweed, keeping an eye out for nails and snakes, and I called out in that bright voice I use when I know a mic is recording. I said my name. I said the location. I said what people said about the place and what I hoped to find. The hum went on. I laughed, small and thin. It sounded like the kind of laugh people make when they think a camera wants them to be confident. Up close, I could see the house had used to be painted a color you might call sky if you had never seen the real sky. It flaked in strips that curled like fingernails. The smell was of cedar beams and old ash and something sour like paper left wet for too long. I stepped over the threshold. The floor was only half floor. The house had no furniture. Windows were open squares of violet dusk. The outer world framed as if it were a different, more expensive kind of painting. I leaned near a window and waved off a mosquito. When I stopped moving, the humming moved closer. Not louder. Closer. Like someone humming in the next room when there was no next room. I told myself it was wind. Old boards like to speak. The hill country keeps its breezes low to the ground where the cedar can slap them into shape. I set the phone to record video and panned slowly. The sun had slid behind the live oaks. The shadows became a liquid that poured into every corner. Somewhere a dog barked like punctuation at the end of an argument. Then the hum did a small thing that changed everything. It rounded itself into a shape that sounded like my name. Not the whole thing, just the rise and fall that only ever belongs to your own name when someone who knows you uses it. The first syllable slightly higher, the second lower and tucked. I said, "This is interesting." It came out dry. I stepped back through the empty door and stood in the bowl of the yard. The hum withdrew until it was only a thread. I tried again, calling my name into the recording so there would be a clean sample. The hum shaped itself again, softer. I thought of the old fisherman's eyes when he said the house sang at dusk. They were the eyes of a man who had already decided he believed and was asking your help to make it a fact in the world. By the time I reached the truck, twilight had turned dense and the first stars were coming up with a few pale crickets. I sat behind the wheel and played back the clip. The house was a dark geometry, and the hum sat beneath my voice like a second voice that didn't have the breath to match me. Then in the last 10 seconds, it did the little shape again. The syllables of my name laid under the sound the way fingerprints are hidden under dust. I felt a small rasp in my throat. I swallowed and told myself I had primed my ears. I told myself it was a trick of expectation. I told myself enough things that by the time I made it back to Marble Falls and a diner with a good chicken fried steak, I had a dozen reasonable explanations and a full battery. Night in that part of Texas is honest. It comes, it falls, it leaves the ground smelling like rock and plant. I sat in my motel bed with a paper cup of coffee and my laptop, and I ran the audio through a couple of simple filters to lift the low bands. The hum rose like a shadow that had been lying down and now stood up. The shape of my name came again, clear enough that a stranger could hear it and say, "Is that your name?" I shut the laptop and stared at the blackout curtains. The cooling unit rattled in its metal sleeve. I thought about the house in that bowl of land, a ruin no one wanted enough to clear, a pocket where sound might pool the way cold air does. I told myself I would go back at dawn, when the house was just a shape and not a throat. At dawn, the place looked less like a mouth. The birds were already going at it, a chorus that had no interest in humans. The hum was gone. I stepped around the ruin and found old things that had been pressed flat by weather and time. A child's marble cloudy with iridescence trapped inside, a little horseshoe for a goat or small pony, a jar lid half sunk in clay. I sat on the hood with the map and an index card of names that the fisherman had offered when I bought him a beer. The last owner was a man named Amos Laird, gone more than a decade. Never married, the fisherman said. Some said he sang on his porch every evening. Some said he sang because he loved it. Some said he sang to keep from thinking about the night his brother didn't come home from the quarry. Folks like to decide why someone loved a habit. I drove into Burnett and asked a clerk at the courthouse if there was a deed. There was. It was old, with transfers that suggested a family that broke and drifted. I wrote down the names. I asked at a cafe if anyone remembered Amos. A woman with flour on her forearm said he kept bees, or maybe his father did. A man by the window said he hummed old hymns, but he didn't go to church. Nobody said much about visitors. Nobody offered stories with edges. The thing about places like this is that everyone knows the story until you ask them for it. Then they shrug and say they have to check on the rolls. I came back in the late afternoon with a fresh card in my pocket. The light had that washed gold again. I walked down into the bowl and sat where a front step would have been if there was a front step left. I put the phone on a flat rock. I said nothing. I waited. When the hum began, it was like hearing a note held in the throat of the land itself. It scraped a little, like a bow on a string that had hair missing. The phone saw it. The app showed a long band near the low end. I breathed and kept my breath even. When the hum shaped my name this time, it did not hide. It made the shape of both syllables and then it stopped. And then it did it again, like a man mustering his strength to say a name he is ashamed to say. I said my name out loud and felt silly. The hum repeated it softer. I said, "If you are Amos, I am listening." The hum stayed low and tired. I felt something absurd, a press of pity that came before any fear. I looked at the threshold and the nails and the bowed ribs of the house, and I thought about a man humming to keep his throat from closing. I realized I was humming almost under my breath, a little nothing of a tune I use in grocery lines to keep from getting impatient. The hum swelled a fraction, the way conversation does when someone leans in and you feel the tilt of attention even if no one has moved. I stopped. The hum dropped back to its old thread. I hummed again, not a tune from anywhere, just the muscle of sound. And the hum rose to meet it like a hand that doesn't quite meet yours but wants to. That night I slept badly. Dreams came in little unstitched pieces. A blue door I couldn't go through. A porch with a chair that faced nothing. The feeling that someone at the edge of my hearing was trying to form a word, and had been trying for so long it had worn grooves around the effort. At 4 a.m, I woke with my tongue dry and a taste of cedar. My phone glowed on the nightstand. I played the last recording with the volume low. When the part with my name came, I leaned in as if my ear could be enough. Beneath the long tone was a grit like footsteps on limestone. After the second time my name took shape, another sound entered, brief and scraped and human. as if someone had dragged a breath through a throat raw from trying. I drove back one more evening because the thing had its hook in me. The sky had a high lid of cloud that bruised purple as the sun slid off. The wind came up from the south and made the cedar cones rattle. I stood where the door used to be and spoke into the air like a man on a phone with no reception. I said my name once. I said Amos once. The hum steadied and began shaping toward something that wasn't either name. The syllables caught and fell. I realized it was trying to say, wait. I held still. My eyes had adjusted enough to see the dark cubes of the window holes and the darker shape of the crushed roof beams. The hum said wait again, more like a word, torn and soft and urgent. What do you want me to wait for? I asked, feeling foolish and careful. The hum tightened into a line that lifted, then dropped, then lifted. I realized with a cold little clarity that it was not a word to me. It was a word to itself. It was something a person says when they lower their voice to keep from crying. Wait, as a way of not saying what follows. The hair on my arms rose in the heat. I whispered, I'm here. The hum shifted like a man turning over in bed. Then I felt it, as distinct as a draft along the back of my neck. The presence of a throat near me in the dark, and in the presence was a grief so practiced it didn't know what to do with a witness. I did something I had not planned. I stepped inside and without thinking began to hum again. I offered the simplest line of sound I could, steady and quiet, a thing you might offer a skittish dog or a child who woke from a bad dream. The other hum rose to match mine, and for a few seconds it braided itself with my tone, two lines finding a mutual place to stand. Then a board under my right foot made a sound like a surprised breath and gave by a half-inch. I froze. The hum stayed steady. There was no upbeat music, no jump. Just the low notes of wood telling me the house was tired. I shifted my weight back. The board held and complained out of habit rather than catastrophe. I went home the next day because a person has to go home or they start becoming the place where they stand. I cut the audio into long strips and listened without watching the waveforms because I didn't want to see a thing before I heard it. I took breaks to do laundry, to buy milk, to return messages. The hum found me in every room, a line beneath the day. It shaped my name again and again, always with that small apology in the lift and drop. And I thought about men who survive by practicing little apologies to no one. I told myself I had what I needed for a video. I told myself a second thing, that I owed the place something like a prayer even though I did not know how to pray. On the third night home, I woke because my phone played a sound I had not told it to play. The hum came thin and mechanical from the nightstand. I reached for it with a hand that already knew it would be warm. The screen showed the clip I had made the first evening. The scrubber moved on its own. The hum shaped my name. Then it shaped a sound that I knew was not intended for me and was for me all the same. It was a small word that men who are alone say when they decide to be brave. Please. It fell like a stone in my chest. I sat up in the dark, breathing as if the air were not the same air as before. I drove back at noon the next day because fear can be an errand if you dress it right. Sun pitched white on the limestone. The house looked more broken in the neat light than it did at dusk because the shadows that had been soft then were hard now, and the ruin had edges that could cut your eyes. I stood at the old threshold and said I had heard him. I said I didn't know what he needed. I said I didn't believe I could fix anything for anyone who had lived and died and hummed a line of sound into the world and pressed his grief into the boards of a ruin. The wind fussed in the cedar. A vulture made a lazy circle the way my feathered cousins do when they are bored and hopeful. I stayed until my skin felt cooked and then I left. Here's the part that I carry like a coin in a pocket. That night, back home again where the air smells different and the nights are packed closer with the noise of other lives, I played the noon clip to prove to myself that daylight would strip the thing of its power. The hum came through the phone as steady as water running in a wall. Then I heard beneath it a second sound, thinner and newer, out of sync. It was my voice. Not the one on the recording. The one in my room. It was humming back. A low line I had not consciously made. A reflex my throat had learned. The phone microphone had always been listening in the way devices listen now. The app had always been greedy. It fed my own hum into the machine and laid it under the old hum, and made a braid of the two until I could not tell where the ruin stopped. And I began, in the weeks after. The humming started following me to places that had never earned a story. The grocery store with its dim freezer lights. The car wash where the brushes slapped and the water beaded and slid. The humming sat in my chest below speech, and though I kept it down during company like a person keeps down a cough, I felt it fill the empty rooms of my hours. Viewers said the video made them sad in a way they liked. They sent me songs that their grandparents hummed. A woman wrote to say that when her husband died, she hummed the same bar over and over while folding his shirts, and the sound kept her from making worse sounds. People told me the house was a trauma pocket, a resonant cavity, a haunting. Everyone had words for it. The only word I had that felt true was name. Yesterday, on my 4th trip, I decided I would leave something there. Not because I believed offerings mattered to the dead, but because offerings matter to the living who must decide whether to walk away. I drove out with the high clouds bruising again. The land had shifted its colors toward a patient brown. As I came up the county road, I saw a truck pulled crooked near the fence line. An old Ford with a hood held down by a rope like a lazy man holds a dog. A man stood by the fence with a hat in his hands, turning it, because he had nothing else to do with his hands. He was 60, maybe more, with the face you get when you work in sun for 40 years. He looked up the way a person looks up when someone comes to the grave they think of as theirs. We nodded. I said the name on my card. He said his name was Laird. He said my video found his niece on the other side of the state and she called him and told him to call his cousin, and then everyone knew and he thought he should come see. He had a voice like split wood. He looked past me at the house with an old emotion that did not fit the present tense. He said Amos was his uncle. He said the house fell after Amos did. I waited and the wind moved a cedar bough like a hand smoothing a sheet. The man said Amos had a brother who died at the quarry. He said their mother hummed. He said Amos hummed when he felt the kind of press a person feels when they cannot move up or down. He said Amos gave a queen bee to anyone who asked because a queen is a gift you cannot pay for with a handshake. And people should remember that. We stood at the threshold while the sun decided whether to wear a cloud. The hum came up through the boards as patient as a man stepping onto a porch he has stepped onto his whole life. The old relative heard it at the same time I did. He took a breath so big it made the sound wobble. He said, "That's him." He did not make more of it than that. He set his hat on his head and took it off again and put it back under his arm. He said he had a jar from the old hives, the last honey, hard as amber, and he had meant to leave it, but now he didn't know if a man should feed a sound. I said I had nothing but the hum in my chest. He nodded as if I had offered him a photograph. We did the only thing two men with no plan can do. We hummed. He found the line of the old hymn the way you find a path in tall grass when your body remembers it. I held a lower tone because that was what my throat wanted. The house listened. Then the hum inside the house lifted and laid itself across ours like a hand that had not held anything in so long it had forgotten the shape of a palm. The three lines stayed together. The wind laid down. Even the sun seemed to settle on the cloud rather than break it. The old man's eyes got wet the way eyes get when a person is not crying but sees the road and knows they are on it for the last time. He left the jar on the threshold anyway and said that he had never seen a thing like this and he had seen a lot of things. He drove off with the rope on his hood fluttering against the grill. I watched until the dust settled. Then I stepped into the house and set my phone on record because habit is a second spine. The hum rose, and with it came the now too familiar shaping of my name. It did not flatter me this time. It landed like a small touch from the inside of my chest. I said I would keep coming as long as my car could make the distance and the road kept itself under me. I said a person can carry a name for another person if the other one is tired. The house answered in the only language it had left. It hummed my name, then the other man's name, then a shape that was not either, a shape that meant someone. Then the board under my right foot made the sound again, the one like a surprised breath. The difference was that this time the breath did not end. The board went, the way things go when their time has come, and the floor tilted and the world became a set of angles that had nothing to do with habit. I fell to my hip and caught myself with my left hand on a beam that gave me a splinter, with the sting of an old thorn. The phone skittered and fell in a slow bounce toward a pocket of shadow that looked deeper than the shadow should have been. I reached and missed. The hum lifted fast, not with threat but with effort. The way a man lifts his voice when he helps you up. I placed my foot where there was something like a joist and pushed. The house considered my plan. It agreed. I climbed out of the tilted place and stood on the threshold with my hands shaking. The phone lay in the dark pocket unseen. I listened. The hum dropped back to its patient line. I waited for fear. It came late like a friend who is always late and always forgiven. I laughed once, a real laugh. I told the house it could keep the phone if it wanted to. The hum made a small shape that might have been a name and might have been a thank you, and might have been the sound of old wood settling into the fact of itself. I walked back to the truck with my pockets light and my throat full. That night, without a phone, I lay on my bed in the kind of quiet that has echoes in it. The hum came with me. It did not need the device. It did not need the ruin. It had become what a person becomes when they practice a thing long enough that the thing can practice them back. It climbed out of my chest and settled on the air. In the final hour before dawn, when the ceiling goes the color of a bruise healing, the hum shifted and made the shape of my name once more. I said here in a voice I hardly recognized. The hum shaped another word, the small one, the brave one. The one people use when they choose to try again. Please. I answered in the way the hill country taught me to answer, with the slow, steady sound you use when you are alone and do not wish to be. If you want to know whether the humming still comes from the house, it does. People write to me and say they hear it on the video even when the speakers are off. They tell me it shapes their names. I think it does not belong to any one person now. I think the land kept the breath of a man who could not stop humming and found a way to let other throats borrow it. The last time I went back, I did not step inside. I stood at the threshold and set nothing down because there was nothing left to leave. The house hummed. I hummed. The two lines found each other with no hesitation. For a second, I felt what Amos felt when the light went copper and the cedar bowed, and the day's weight needed a place to sit that was not his bones. It felt like a name said without shame. It felt like the kind of crying you can survive. If you drive that way at dusk, roll your window down when the road hollows. You will hear something you almost name and almost do not. Do not be proud. Be the opposite. Let the sound find the shape of you. If it says your name, answer with your breath. Do not use words. Hold the note and let the note hold you. The house that hummed will sing until it falls all the way into itself. Even then, the bowl of land will keep a little of it, the way a shell keeps the sea. I carry it now in the way a man carries a tune he did not write. It comes up in checkout lines. It sits with me in the car wash. It is a habit I cannot put down. I do not try. I have learned that some sounds are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be shared until the weight of them is light enough to set down for a while, and pick up again when the dusk falls and the cedar talks, and the old granite is warm under your hand. That is when the hum is truest. That is when, if you are quiet, it shapes your name with the care of a man trying not to cry, and you answer without words because words are not what it wants from you. It wants the breath, and you have that, and for a little while at least you will have enough.